Chapter 597. The spiritual land was unharmed. After all, this was the depths of Taimang Mountain. Even if there were cultivators passing by, with the concealment of the array set up by Lu Yi, they might not be able to detect anything. Activating the jade pendant, they each entered. The beautiful scenery was imprinted in their eyes. On the soft green grass, many wolf pups that had not yet grown up were playing around. There were not many adult wolves left in the spiritual land, only a dozen or so. When they noticed the commotion, they all looked over, but when they confirmed that it was Lu Yi and the others who had returned, they no longer paid attention to them. 4 or 5 hours later, all the wolves returned. The demon wolves could not fly, so they were much slower than Lu Yi and the others. At this moment, Lu Yi was standing in front of the Tianji pillar. His mind was connected to the Tianji treasure house, and he bought a lot of materials from the Tianji treasure house. The location of the spiritual land had been exposed. Tan Sheng and Xiao Yang would not let it go. It could be foreseen that it would not be long before the cultivators of the Myriad Devil Ridge came to attack. Since they had decided to stay in the spiritual land, the necessary array needed to be set up, especially the teleportation array. Although the spiritual land had the Tianji pillar invited by Lu Yi and everyone could return to the 9 regions at any time, teleportation arrays, setting up a few was not a bad thing. After buying the materials, Lu Yi began to refine the array flags. He had just refined a lot of array flags in the Fox Immortal Valley some time ago. However, they had all been consumed. The result was to help the fox demon kill the berserk giant ape. After a few days, he began to refine the array flags again. The feeling was completely different. It was easier to refine. This was not only the result of one level of cultivation increase, but also because his mind had become stronger. The stronger the mind, the more subtle the control of spiritual power. A few days ago, he could refine 2 array flags. Now, he could refine 3. The efficiency had improved a lot. Li Baxian and Feng Yuechan were responsible for finding a suitable place to set up the teleportation array. As for the giant armor, it could not help much. It was good enough that it did not cause trouble. Since returning, it had been in a state of cultivation. While they were busy here, in another valley less than 3,000 miles away from the Huitian Valley, a large array covered it. From time to time, cultivators came in and out. This place was the Holy Eve's spiritual land. Even on the 10 maps sold by the Tianji Business Alliance, this spiritual land was marked. The Holy Eve's spiritual land had already existed in the Cloudy River battlefield for more than 20 years, and was considered one of the more famous spiritual lands in the vicinity. Compared to the spiritual land of Lu Yi and the others, the Holy Eve's spiritual land was undoubtedly a large spiritual land. After more than 20 years of development, the scale of the spiritual land had been constantly expanding. Now, the entire spiritual land had more than 100 cultivators. In the entire Cloud River battlefield, there were not many spiritual land that was larger than the Holy Eve's spiritual land. What was even rarer was that a few years ago, the Holy Eve's spiritual land had been promoted from a B-class spiritual land to a A-class spiritual land. The grade of the spiritual land could be upgraded, and the scale could also be expanded. All it needed to do was to integrate more spring spirits. Take Lu Ye's spiritual land for example. A grade spiritual land was indeed the highest grade spiritual land, but if Lu Yi could get spring spirits of other grades and place them in the spiritual spring, then although the grade of the spiritual land would not be upgraded, the scale could be expanded. The higher the grade of the spring spirit integrated, the more the scale could be expanded. In this way, it could accommodate more cultivators to stay and cultivate. Basically, the large-scale spiritual lands in the Cloudy River battlefield were developed step by step like this. Many sects had their own spiritual lands, which were passed down through generations of cultivators. This had an extremely long-term significance to the development of the sect, because as long as the cultivators of the sect reached the Cloud River realm, they could enter the spiritual land to cultivate in peace. However, for many cultivators, although it was safe to cultivate in the spiritual land, it was also a shackle. If it was too safe, there would be less struggle, and it would also cause them to lose their drive. Therefore, even if it was a sect that had a spiritual land inheritance, The cultivators would not always stay in the spiritual land. Every few days, they would go out to gain experience. The Holy Eve's spiritual land was not the spiritual land of one sect, but two. One was the Sacred Flame sect, and the other was the Vast Universe sect. Both were sects of the Myriad Demon Ridge, and they were both in Yu province, so they had a good relationship with each other. When their disciples arrived at the Cloudy River battlefield, they would naturally help each other. Currently, the cultivators in the Holy Eve's spiritual land were led by two Ninth Order cultivators. One was Huoliao Yuan of the Sacred Flame sect, and the other was Tu Guanxiong of the Vast Universe sect. Two Ninth Order cultivators in a spiritual land with over 100 cultivators was a very small proportion. It was not that the two sects only had two Ninth Order Cloud River Realm cultivators. No matter how weak these two sects were, they were still 4th or 5th grade sects. How could they only have two Ninth Order Cloud River Realm cultivators? It was just that Cloud River Realm cultivators did not stay in the Cloudy River battlefield all year round, especially after their cultivation reached a high level. They would spend most of their time in the 9 provinces. Increasing their cultivation was secondary, and tempering themselves was more important. If they did not need to stay in the spiritual land and take care of their junior brothers and sisters, they would not stay in the spiritual land all year round. Even if they stayed in the spiritual land for 3 months, other Ninth Order Cloud River Realm cultivators would replace them when the time was up. In the secret room, Huoliao Yuan was cultivating. Suddenly, there was a movement from the battlefield imprint. He did not check it immediately and just sat there quietly. After a stick of incense worth of time, he slowly opened his eyes and spat out a mouthful of turbid air. Lifting his hand, he touched the battlefield imprint and checked it. Huoliao Yuan's expression changed slightly. This message was sent by a junior brother of his who was traveling in the Cloudy River battlefield. The content of the message made him very interested. After thinking for a moment, he sent out a message and hurriedly got up. Walking out of the secret room, he went straight to another room. Before he knocked, the door opened by itself and a figure appeared in front of him. It was the other Ninth Order Cloud River Realm cultivator in the spiritual land, Tu Guanxiong. Welcoming Huoliao Yuan in, Tu Guanxiong asked, "Senior Brother Hua, is the news reliable?" It was sent by Nan Chung from the outside. "It is not conclusive, so I can't be sure," Huoliao Yuan replied. Tu Guanxiong thought for a moment and remembered who the Nanchun is. The two Ninth Order Cloud River Realm cultivators in the two sects were not limited to just the two of them. Naturally, there were more than 100 Cloud River Realm cultivators in the two sects. However, the spiritual land could only accommodate 100 people, so more disciples were scattered around the Cloudy River battlefield to search for opportunities on their own. Where did he get the news from? Tu Guanxiong asked again. Huoliao Yuan said, someone sent him a message and the person who received the news also heard it from somewhere else. The news has been passed around a few times, so it is impossible to determine the source. Senior Brother Hua, how credible do you think this news is? It is hard to believe any news without seeing it with your own eyes. However, since it is related to Lu Ye, it is worth investigating. However, what I am concerned about is that the information in the news is too detailed. The information he received was not only about Lu Ye's current location, but also the various forces in the spiritual land, including the cultivation of Li Baxian and the others, as well as the large number of wolves. Senior Brother Hua, are you suspecting? Tu Guanxiong said thoughtfully. If I am not wrong, someone must have suffered a great loss at the hands of Lu Ye, but there is no hope for revenge, so they want to kill him with a borrowed knife. He paused for a moment. There are nearly 300 monster wolves. Lu Ye is not from the beast taming school, so how can he control them? Even if he was from the beast taming school, it was impossible for him to control so many monster wolves. If that is the case, we may not be able to handle it. Tu Guanxiong was worried, but he knew about the grudge between the Sacred Flame sect and the Jade Blood sect. In addition, Lu Ye had a huge bounty on his head, so he knew that Huoliao Yuan must be tempted. Otherwise, he would not have come to discuss this matter with him. Not to mention Huoliao Yuan, even Yang Kai himself was tempted. After the last hunting ground incident, Wuxia went to the Spirit Stream battlefield and extorted a huge amount of resources from the great sects of Myriad Demon Ridge, so Myriad Demon Ridge's bounty on him had increased significantly. These days, countless people had been searching for Wuxia's whereabouts in the Cloud River battlefield, but unfortunately, they had found nothing. No one knew where he was, but now that they knew his exact location, who wouldn't be tempted? If this news were to spread, it would only take a few days for that place to be overcrowded. The person who secretly leaked the news did not choose to spread it out, but instead accurately passed it on to the Sacred Flame sect. Obviously, he was not willing to give up. There are indeed a lot of monster wolves, but as long as we plan properly, we may have a chance to kill Wuxia. Wuxia was just a third-order cultivator some time ago, so even if he received the reward from the hunting grounds hunting list, his cultivation wouldn't have changed too much. Against such an enemy, as long as they found the opportunity, they could kill him in one strike. Why bother with a pack of wolves? No matter what, let's send someone to investigate first. We have to make sure the news is reliable. As for someone who wants to reap the benefits, Huo Liao Yuan's eyes flashed with a trace of coldness. That depends on whether he has the ability to snatch food from the tiger's mouth. The other party was acting so sneakily, so he was obviously alone. What did they have to fear with the strength of the entire spirit land? I understand, Tu Guanxiong responded and immediately sent a message. Naturally, a ghost cultivator was needed to find someone to investigate. 99% of the Sacred Flame sect's disciples were Dharma cultivators, so they couldn't find a single ghost cultivator. They could only send someone from the Huan Yu sect. Not long after, a short and thin man stepped in. Senior Brother Tu, Senior Brother Hua. Tu Guanxiong said, Yen Gue, there's a place you need to investigate. The ghost cultivator named Yen Gue said, please tell me, Senior Brother. Returning Heaven Valley. Yen Gue took out the 10-point map and checked it. After locating the location of Returning Heaven Valley, he raised his eyebrows and said, this place is deep in the Great Mang Mountains. Senior Brothers, what's there? You'll know when you get there. Tu Guanxiong didn't say it out loud as he was afraid of giving his junior brother a preconceived impression. Remember, investigate it carefully and pay attention to your safety. That place might be dangerous. Yen Gue didn't mind. Don't worry, Senior Brother. I'll be careful. Although his cultivation wasn't high, he was still a 7th-order Cloud River Realm cultivator. Moreover, as a ghost cultivator, he was best at hiding. Spying for information was a piece of cake for him. If you find anything, report it immediately. Yes. Yen Gue accepted the order and left. He left the room and flew up into the sky on his artifact. Chapter 598. Wuxia's cultivation had advanced by a level, and with the benefits of the Heaven Fate baptism, the efficiency of refining array chess had greatly increased. In just 2 days, Wuxia had nearly 300 more array flags. Li Baxian and Feng Yuechan had also found a few suitable locations to set up a transmission array. With the consumption of a large number of array flags, the array was formed one by one. Soon, the 300 array flags were all used up. On the 4th day after returning from Fox Immortal Valley, Wuxia was refining more array flags when he suddenly raised his head and looked in a certain direction outside the spirit land. The next moment, he stood up and rushed straight out of the spirit land. The moment his figure rushed out of the protective array, the concealment and aura concealment spirit runes were already on his body. His figure quickly disappeared. Less than a mile away from the spirit land, Yen Gue hid his figure and quietly hid behind a big tree. After receiving Tu Guanxiong's order, he rushed all the way here. With his 7th-order Cloud River Realm cultivation, it shouldn't have taken him 4 days to reach here. However, this place was deep in the Great Mang Mountains after all. There were many dangers along the way. Fortunately, he was a ghost cultivator and could avoid many unnecessary battles. It was just a delay in time. He had just arrived at Returning Sky Valley today, but he didn't expect to trigger an alarm array not long after he arrived here. He immediately distanced himself from the alarm array and hid in the dark to observe silently. Tu Guanxiong only asked him to investigate the situation in Returning Sky Valley. He didn't specify what was here, But for Tu Guanxiong and Fire Prairie to pay so much attention, it was obvious that returning Sky Valley was hiding some secrets. Since there was an alarm array, there must be someone who set up the array. Who was hiding here? Now that he had triggered the alarm array, the person who set up the array would definitely come over to investigate. When the time came, he would know. But what made him feel strange was, after waiting for a long time, there was no sign of anyone. Thousands of feet away from him, Lu Yi hid his figure and secretly observed. There were no traces of wild beasts or monster beasts around, and there was no abnormality in his field of vision. Someone had been here. And judging from the current situation, there was a high probability that it was a ghost cultivator. He rushed out the moment the array was triggered, but there was still no trace of the other party. The other party was obviously hiding. This ghost cultivator was a cautious person. Someone invited by Tan Xing and Xia Liang? It didn't seem like it. These two knew the situation of the spirit land like the back of their hands. Why would they invite a ghost cultivator over? Was he just passing by? Maybe it wasn't. Lu Yi moved slowly, not revealing his aura at all as he quietly scanned his surroundings. Now that his mental strength had increased significantly, even without the help of the insight spirit inscriptions, he would be able to detect any abnormalities within a radius of 300 feet. 1 cup of tea, 1 stick of incense. The game in the dark began quietly. It wasn't until nearly an hour later that Lu Yi suddenly turned his head and looked behind a large tree. Over there was something strange. With the enhancement of the insight spirit tattoo, his vision changed and colorful lights started to flow. As expected, behind the big tree, the colorful lights shuttled back and forth, outlining the outline of a short figure. He stealthily crept up. Yen Gui suddenly had a feeling of uneasiness. Although this feeling was very faint, as a ghost cultivator who often appeared in dangerous places, he had always been a cautious person. If not for this, Tu Guanxiong would not have let him come alone to investigate the situation. He immediately held his breath and concentrated, silently sensing the surroundings to search for the source of the uneasy feeling. At this moment, there was a sudden fluctuation of spiritual energy behind him. Without thinking, he hurriedly turned around and blocked the attack with the curved sword in his hand. Not far behind him, a figure had appeared out of nowhere. When the fiery red sword light slashed down, Yen Gui felt a huge force coming from the front along with the explosion of spiritual energy. He could not help but fly backward as his blood and chi surged in his chest. With his concealment broken, he was also exposed. In midair, he clearly saw the face of the person who ambushed him. With a glance, his eyes lit up and he exclaimed, "Louis! So that was it! So that was it!" No wonder Senior Brother Tu and Senior Brother Hua asked him to investigate the situation here. It turned out that this was where Lu Ye was hiding. He had seen Lu Ye's image before. The Holy Eve's spiritual land was dominated by the Sacred Fire sect, and the Sacred Fire sect had a deep grudge with the Jade Blood sect. Previously, Hua Liaoyuan had found an image recording stone from somewhere and recorded Lu Ye's image. Hua Liaoyuan's action was undoubtedly to let all the disciples of the Sacred Fire sect remember Lu Ye's appearance. Therefore, even if he had never seen Lu Yi before, Yen Gui recognized him at a glance. His heart was filled with excitement, but what followed was endless shock. A storm of saber force enveloped him as the saber light carried the aura of death. Yen Gui retreated again and again. In a short time, the web between his thumb and forefinger split open, his arm went numb, and the spiritual energy in his body surged. This guy, how is he so strong? Although he was a ghost cultivator and was not good at fighting head-on, he was still a 7th-order cultivator. The spiritual energy fluctuations from Lu Ye were only at the 5th order, so he could not resist at all. Facing the violent saber force, he could not help but feel like he was being crushed. "I'll die." This horrifying thought uncontrollably popped up in his heart. The excitement on Yen Gui's face had long disappeared, leaving only fear and panic. Lu Yi did not use his full strength when he first slashed out because he was not sure which camp this person was from. However, when Yen Gui blurted out his name, the other party's position was very clear. Since he recognized him, he naturally knew his background. If the other party was from Grand Heaven Alliance, he would take the initiative to reveal the light of his battlefield mark. If he did not, then he was from Myriad Demon Ridge. Therefore, from the second slash, Louis did not hold back at all. A tearing sound rang out, accompanied by Yen Gray's scream. The clothes on his chest were torn, and a bloody wound appeared. Under the pain, Yen Gray's defense became more and more chaotic. Louis took advantage of the situation and slashed down again. This time, Yen Gray was almost beheaded. Fortunately, he raised his spirit artifact at the last moment to block the attack. Even so, his body was sent flying, blood splattering in the air. Landing in a sorry state, Yen Gray did not escape immediately. Instead, he raised his hand and pressed it on his battlefield mark. He did not know why Wuxia was so strong, but he knew that he had been exposed. This time, he was doomed. Since that was the case, he had to send the news back no matter what. He could not die in vain. He did not even have the slightest intention of begging for mercy, because he knew that begging for mercy would only bring him greater humiliation and torture. However, in the next moment, his heart violently contracted, and his strength and vitality rapidly dissipated. Looking down, he saw a flaming long saber piercing his chest. The violent spirit energy exploded in his body, causing him to vomit blood and stagger. The light in his eyes quickly dimmed. When Lu Yi pulled out his saber, his body fell forward. Shaking off the blood on the mountain coiling saber, Lu Yi sheathed it. A red light flew out from the corpse of the ghost cultivator in front of him and landed on the back of Lu Ye's hand like a firefly. Frowning at the corpse in front of him, Lu Yi suddenly realized that he seemed to have underestimated his current strength. Even if the other party was a ghost cultivator who was not good at fighting head-on, he was still a 7th-order realm cultivator. Facing his current strength, he could not resist at all. Thinking back to the 7th-order weapon cultivator in the hunting ground, he had gone all out against Li Ba Xian and Feng Yuchan. In the end, if he had not successfully activated his beast transformation secret technique, it was obvious who would have won. In just 2 months, the 7th-order weapon cultivator who could force the three of them to go all out could not even last 30 breaths in front of him. The growth of his strength could be described as earth-shattering. Of course, in the hunting ground he was only a 3rd-order Cloud River realm cultivator. Although it had only been 2 months, his cultivation had jumped 2 minor realms, reaching the 5th-order Cloud River realm. But it was undeniable that the Heaven's Fate baptism in the altar of Fox Immortal Valley had strengthened his foundation by a lot. Especially the increase in the flow of spirit energy in his body. The faster the spirit energy in a cultivator's body flowed, the stronger the strength he could erupt with. Li Ba Xian and Feng Yuchan arrived together. Seeing the corpse in front of them, Li Ba Xian asked, "What happened?" Lu Yi said, "Someone came to spy on the situation." Li Ba Xian frowned, "Xiao Yang? Tanxing?" But then he denied it. "That's not right. They know the situation of the spirit land very well. There's no need for them to send someone to spy on it. Are they just passing by?" "It doesn't seem like it." Lu Yi shook his head. If he was just passing by, there was no reason for him to accurately locate Huitian Valley. Recalling the ghost cultivator's reaction when he saw Lu Ye's appearance, Lu Yi felt that this ghost cultivator was sent here to gather information without knowing anything. Lu Yi raised his hand and with a surge of spirit energy, he grabbed the 2 storage bags on the corpse. In just a moment, the seal on the storage bags was opened. Lu Yi rummaged through them and soon found a jade token that looked like an identity card. On the front, there was a picture of a palace with a big word engraved in the middle of the palace. Looking at the back, it should be the name of the dead ghost cultivator, Yen Gei. Lu Yi threw the jade token to Li Ba Xian. Li Ba Xian looked at it and said thoughtfully, "It might be someone from Huan Yu sect." Huan Yu sect. Lu Yi thought carefully and reluctantly remembered that this should be a 5th-rank sect. When he was in the inner circle of the battlefield, he saw this sect's encampment marked on the map. Holy Eve's spiritual land. Li Ba Xian murmured again. "What?" Li Ba Xian took out the map and checked it. He frowned and said, "If it's someone from Huan Yu sect, then he might be from Holy Eve's spiritual land." Holy Eve's spiritual land is a spiritual land shared by Huanyu sect and another force from Wanmo Ridge. It's a large spiritual land and is marked on the map. It's only 2,000 to 3,000 miles away from us. 2,000 to 3,000 miles was undoubtedly a very long distance for Spirit Stream Realm cultivators. But for Cloud River Realm cultivators, it was nothing. With Lu Ye's current speed, even if he flew at full speed, it would only take about a day. Chapter 599. Little junior brother should be familiar with the other force from Myriad Demon Ridge. Which one? Sacred Flame Sect. Lu Yi was not unfamiliar with this force. The first time he came into contact with them, they had left a deep impression on Lu Yi. It was at the Golden Dome of the Spirit Stream battlefield. His last battle was against a Sacred Flame Sect Saintess who had broken her spirit aperture and dropped her cultivation from the 7th Order to the 6th Order. That battle could be said to be extremely tragic. In the end, both sides were like oil lamps that ran out of oil. In the end, he used up the last bit of spirit energy in his body. He had to use the Fire Phoenix technique to kill her. Later, in the inner circle of the battlefield, when the Grand Heaven Alliance Coalition Army was formed, Lu Yi deliberately led the coalition army to break into Sacred Flame Sect's encampment because Big Senior Sister said that Sacred Flame Sect and Blue Blood Sect had a great grudge. Suddenly, someone suspected to be from Universe Sect appeared here, and 2,000 or 3,000 kilometers away, there was a Holy Eve spirit land jointly controlled by Sacred Flame Sect and Universe Sect. Li Baxian couldn't help but make a lot of connections. If this person is really from Holy Eve's spirit land, then we may have a lot of trouble in the near future, Li Baxian said. Without mentioning anything else, such a large first-grade sect had been beaten to the point where it dropped in rank and only recovered to rank 4 today. This kind of hatred could not be resolved. Once the people of the Sacred Flame Sect knew of Lu Ye's current position, they would definitely take action. Let's act according to the circumstances. Lu Ye's eyes flashed. He originally thought that with a great spiritual land he would be able to cultivate in peace with Li Baxian and the others, but who would have thought that things would not go as he wished? Not long after, Xiao Yang, Tan Xing, and the others had attacked, and now he might be targeted by the Holy Eve spiritual land. Lu Yi didn't panic. The spirit land had the Heaven's Fate Pillar he invited, and there were many spirit arrays and wolf packs guarding it. The worst outcome was nothing more than the spirit land being destroyed. He, Li Baxian, and the others would be forced to return to the 9 provinces. Did this person send a message before he died? Li Baxian asked. Lu Yi nodded, yes. But whether it was successful or not, I don't know. When the guy named Yen Gui sensed that something was wrong, he suddenly raised his hand and touched his battlefield mark. Although Lu Yi quickly killed him, Lu Yi didn't know whether he succeeded or not. Let's prepare for the worst and make the most appropriate response, Li Baxian said, and the 3 of them quickly returned to the spiritual land. Hoopa was sleeping soundly. The reason for this was because Lu Yi had fed him the demonic core of the Overlord-level demonic beast. He had already opened the storage pouch he got from the fox demon. His harvest was quite bountiful. Just the Yao cores alone numbered in the hundreds. Thinking about how the fox demoness had been domineering in Fox Immortal Valley for 20 years, it was not surprising that she had accumulated so many demon cores. Hoopa had consumed many monster cores in the past, but he had never had much of a reaction. This time, after swallowing the monster core of the berserk giant ape, he fell into a deep sleep not long after. It was obvious that the monster core contained too much power, and Hoopa needed to sleep to refine it. This caused Yi to enter a state of silence as well. However, Lu Yi was looking forward to it. With Hoopa's strange reaction this time, Hoopa would definitely reap a lot of benefits when he woke up. Perhaps he could even break through again. Holy Eve's spiritual land. Tu Guanxiong suddenly felt a reaction from the battlefield imprint and hurriedly checked it. He found that it was a message from Yen Gui, who had left a few days ago. The message was very simple and only had 3 words. Lu Ye. It was not that Yen Gui did not want to send more messages, but there was no time. Sending these 3 words was already his limit. Moreover, just as Tu Guanxiong finished checking this unclear information, Yen Gui's battlefield imprint completely disappeared. Tu Guanxiong's face changed drastically. The disappearance of the battlefield imprint undoubtedly meant that Yen Gui had fallen. This was something he never expected. Yen Gui was a 7th-order cultivator, and as a ghost cultivator, he was best at concealment. As long as he did not expose himself, even if he encountered a 9th-order Cloud River Realm cultivator, he would not be in too much danger. This was also the reason why he was relieved to let Yen Gui go. He only went to returning Sky Valley to investigate the situation, so how could he have fallen? However, the last message from Yen Gui undoubtedly stated that he had seen Wuxia. In other words, the information Huoliao Prairie obtained before was true. Wuxia was in returning Sky Valley. Damn it! Tu Guanxiong gritted his teeth. His junior brother's inexplicable death pained him greatly. Suppressing the grief in his heart, Tu Guanxiong walked out of the room and found Huoliao Prairie. He told him about Yen Gui's encounter. Huoliao Prairie was astonished. Yen Gui is dead? Tu Guanxiong replied in a deep voice, he's dead. The disappearance of the battlefield imprint was the most conclusive proof. Huoliao Prairie's mouth twitched, but he could only say in the end, my condolences. Yen Gui can't die in vain. Tu Guanxiong said coldly. Huoliao Prairie nodded, of course not. Since Wuxia is in returning Sky Valley, I'll bring some people to kill him. Since the information about Wuxia in returning Sky Valley is true, the rest shouldn't be false. A few hundred monster wolves are not easy to deal with. Brother Hua, we may not be able to succeed with fewer people. Huoliao Prairie nodded. Don't worry, I'll send a message to the nearby disciples of Sacred Flame sect to gather at returning Sky Valley. In addition, I'll bring half of the people from the Spirit Land with me. Half of the cultivators from the spiritual land would be 50 people. If the cultivators gathered by the Sacred Flame sect were included, they could easily form a lineup of 100 people. Such a lineup could deal with the Huitian Valley, if the information they had was correct. Bring 70%. Tu Guanxiong said, since we're going to attack, we'll crush them with absolute power. Huoliao Prairie wanted to say that there was no need, but seeing the hatred in Tu Guanxiong's eyes, he finally nodded. Then I'll listen to Brother Tuesday. I'll kill Wuxia with my own hands and bring his head back. Tu Guanxiong said, Brother Hua, don't be careless. Last time in the hunting ground, Wuxia used the Divine Pillar to escape back to the 9 states. Now, he may be able to use the Divine Pillar again. I've heard about what happened in the hunting ground. The biggest reason he could escape back then was not the Divine Pillar, but the Golden Body Token's protection. This time, he doesn't have the Golden Body Token. Even if he uses the Divine Pillar, he may not be able to escape back to the 9 states. As Huoliao Prairie said this, a cold smile appeared on his face. Moreover, Brother Tu, don't forget that I still have that thing. As long as I find a chance, he'll definitely die. Tu Guanxiong was startled at first, but then he seemed to remember something and nodded. That's true, but it's a waste to use it on Wuxia. I'll act according to the situation. Brother Tu, just wait for my good news. After making his decision, Huoliao Prairie immediately took action. Those who were not cultivating in seclusion in the spiritual land were immediately gathered, and 70% of them were taken. Then, Huoliao Prairie continuously sent messages to the outside world, gathering the disciples of the Sacred Flame sect who were scattered outside and gathering them at the periphery of the Taimeng Mountains. After only an hour, a huge spirit boat took to the air and flew in the direction of the Taimeng Mountains. In the spiritual stream battlefield, such large spirit boats that could carry many cultivators were not rare, especially in the inner and core circles. Basically, every sect had one. Although such a large spirit boat could not fly as fast as a small flying spirit boat, it was not much slower. It was a necessary tool for a sect or a force to travel. However, in the Cloud River battlefield, this kind of large-scale flying spirit tool was very rare. This was because Cloud River tier cultivators rarely gathered in large groups. Only a few large-scale spiritual lands would be equipped with such a flying spirit tool in case of emergency. Tu Guanxiong watched as the spirit boat left. Although he wanted to take revenge personally, someone had to stay in the spiritual land. Between him and Huoliao Prairie, one of them had to stay behind. Moreover, Huoliao Prairie still had that thing, so he could only let Huoliao Prairie lead the way. When the spirit boat set off, there were two pairs of eyes watching silently from dozens of miles away. They were Xia Liang and Tan Xing. After a few days of recuperation, the two of them had basically recovered. Brother Xia's prediction is amazing. As expected, the Holy Eve's spiritual land could not hold back and made a big move. Moreover, it seems that the news has not been completely leaked. Xia Liang snorted, "Wealth moves people's hearts. How could they bear to let the news leak? When the time comes, everyone will want a piece of the pie. Let's go too? Let's go." The two of them did not follow behind the spirit boat of the Holy Eve's spiritual land. After all, they already knew the location of Huitian Valley, so they could arrive there first and wait quietly. In the spiritual land, it was quiet. Li Baxian and the others were cultivating. Hoopa was still in a deep sleep. Lu Yi held a broken arrow in his hand, turning it over and over to examine it. This broken arrow was Wei Kei's. When he was about to die, he used this broken arrow. Its power was so great that even the body of the giant armor could not withstand the damage of this broken arrow and was directly pierced through. Afterward, Lu Yi and Li Baxian chased after the heavily injured Tan Sheng and Xia Liang. Feng Yuechan stayed behind to look after the giant armor and put away the broken arrow. This thing looked quite old. It was unknown where Wei Kei found it. However, according to Feng Yuechan, this broken arrow was a rare treasure. The so-called exotic treasure was a treasure whose quality could not be judged by ordinary rules. For example, the golden body token used by Lu Yi in the hunting ground, or even the tracing disc used by Tan Sheng to track his position, were rare treasures. There were many exotic treasures in the 9 continents. Most of them came from secret realms, and some were bestowed by the heavens. However, as long as it was related to exotic treasures, it could not be judged by common sense. They often had all kinds of strange functions. Take this broken arrow, for example. According to Lu Ye's investigation, there were not many barriers on it. At most, it was equivalent to a top-grade spirit artifact. However, there was no top-grade spirit artifact that could display such powerful killing power. One had to know that even the giant armor's protection could not block this broken arrow. Moreover, this was only a broken arrow. It was hard to imagine what kind of power it could display if it was complete. There was a crack on the broken arrow, so it shouldn't be used much more than a few times. The reason why Feng Yuchan gave it to Lu Yi was because the amount of spirit chi required to activate it was simply too great. Even with her 6th order Cloud River Realm cultivation, if she really wanted to activate the power of this broken arrow, she would have to exhaust all of her spirit chi. Therefore, it was difficult for this thing to display its power in her hands. Chapter 600. Wei Kei was a 9th order Cloud River Realm cultivator, so he had much more spirit energy than Feng Yuechan. If he had any other choice, he would not have used the broken arrow. First of all, every time he used this treasure, he would be closer to being completely destroyed, so he was reluctant to use it. Second of all, it would consume too much spirit energy. Once he used it, it would either kill his enemy or himself. But he never expected that he would die even if he was forced to use this treasure. Lu Ye's cultivation base was 1 level lower than Feng Yuechan's. Under normal circumstances, he wouldn't be able to activate this treasure. However, he still had a spirit storage ring on his finger, which was something he had bought specifically for the Fire Phoenix spirit pattern. After so many days, the spirit power stored in the spirit storage ring had reached an extremely high level, which was enough to activate the power of the broken arrow once. It was for this reason that Feng Yuechan gave the broken arrow to Lu Yi. Refining the broken arrow was not difficult. According to the quality of spirit artifacts, it was only equivalent to a top-grade spirit artifact. Lu Yi only spent half a day to refine it. Strictly speaking, this thing was equivalent to an imperial artifact, but it was slightly more powerful. Now that the spirit land could be attacked at any time, having an additional means like this would increase their strength. Several leisurely days passed in the blink of an eye, and everything was calm. Lu Yi almost thought that Yen Gei, who was killed by him, was really just passing by. Until one day, A huge shadow covered the sky outside the spirit land, followed by a few probing attacks that bombarded the array. In the empty valley, layers of ripples suddenly appeared, revealing the location of the array. Search. Lu Yi immediately dashed out of the house and looked over. Not far away, there was a huge spirit boat floating in the air. On the spirit boat, there were several figures looking down. On the front of the spirit boat, there was a blazing flame symbol that was extremely eye-catching. They still came. Li Baxian's sigh came from the side. The worst scenario had come true. Lu Yi stared at the flame symbol. How could he not know that it was the Sacred Flame Sect? The Sacred Flame Sect cultivators had such a symbol on their foreheads, so it was easy to distinguish. If there were only the 4 of them in the spiritual land, they could only use the Tianji pillar to return to the 9 states. However, with the help of the wolf pack, they might be able to resist the attack of the Sacred Flame Sect. Lu Yi didn't rely too much on the cultivation environment, but this grade A spirit land could make cultivation easier for Li Baxian and the others. They might not be able to obtain such a spirit land in the future, so they had to try their best to keep it. Senior brother, there's a formation below. Looking at the scale, it's very likely to be a spiritual land. On the spirit boat, a cultivator came to Huo Yaoyuan's side and reported with a slightly excited expression. Huo Yaoyuan looked down indifferently without making a sound. It had to be said that the concealment formation set up here was extremely ingenious. If he hadn't obtained accurate information in advance, he might not have paid attention to this valley even if he was passing by. However, after a few probing attacks, the formation here had been exposed. This meant that the information he received was true. Lu Ye was hiding here. He stepped out of the spirit boat and stood in the air, displaying his might. He slowly said, "Lu Ye, do you want to come out yourself, or do you want me to drag you out?" His voice wasn't loud, but it was enough to spread throughout the entire Huitian Valley under the influence of spiritual power. There was a commotion on the spirit boat. Lu Ye? Although they had followed Huo Yaoyuan all the way here, they didn't know why. Huo Yaoyuan had never explained the purpose of this trip to any of the cultivators. When they saw that there was a formation here that seemed to be a spiritual land, many of the cultivators thought that Huo Yaoyuan was here to plunder the spring spirit. They had done this many times over the years. Otherwise, the Holy Eve's spiritual land wouldn't have been able to expand into a grade A spirit land. However, when the name Lu Ye reached their ears, everyone seemed to have woken up from a dream. Not only could there be a spiritual land here, but the famous Lu Ye was also hiding here. In an instant, the cultivators of the Holy Eve's spiritual land were excited. To the cultivators of the Myriad Demon Ridge, Lu Ye's name meant unimaginable wealth. When they looked in the direction of the spiritual land, everyone's eyes were filled with fervor. Especially the cultivators of the Sacred Flame Sect, their eyes were burning like flames. To the people of the Sacred Flame Sect, Lu Ye was not only a bounty target with a huge amount of wealth, but also a disciple of the Jade Blood Sect who had caused their sect's grade to drop. Even if there was no bounty, they would definitely kill Lu Ye if they met him in the wild. Huo Yaoyuan's voice echoed in the valley, but there was no response. Even the formation below didn't change at all. Stubborn. Huo Yaoyuan snorted coldly. He raised a hand and gently put it down. He said, "Surround him." On the spirit boats, figures darted out one after another and surrounded the spiritual land in the blink of an eye. In the spiritual land, Li Baxian looked at the many figures above with a grave expression. The number of enemies was much greater than he had imagined. There were a total of 150 to 160 people. The Holy Eve's spiritual land had sent out 70 people. Previously, Huo Yaoyuan had sent a message to the nearby disciples of the Sacred Flame Sect to gather at the periphery of the Taimang Mountain. If not for the lack of time, more people would have come. Such a force was not something the spiritual land's current defenses could contend against. Although there were more wolves, they couldn't fly. Their role in the battle against the cultivators was greatly reduced. With the power of the spiritual land, resisting 100 people was the limit. 150 to 160 people was simply impossible. It seemed that the Sacred Flame sect already knew the situation of the spiritual land like the back of their hand. Otherwise, they wouldn't have sent out so many people. Xiao Yang, Tensheng, these two guys really did a lot of harm. Just as he was about to persuade Liu Ye to return to the 9 states, he turned his head and saw that Liu Ye's expression was calm without any worry. He swallowed his words and asked suspiciously, "Little junior brother seems to have a countermeasure?" Liu Ye shook his head and said, "Different situations call for different measures." Li Baxian thought for a moment and said, "Don't force it. If the situation is not right, return to the 9 states immediately." "I understand." At the same time, in another direction, Xia Liang and Tan Xing were also quietly watching. However, when the Holy Eve's spiritual land completely set up their formation, their expressions darkened instead of being happy. "This is bad." Tan Xing frowned. "Huang, this trash brought so many people here. Instead of breaking the formation, they are showing off. Liu Ye must have run away." Xia Liang was puzzled. How did the Holy Eve's spiritual land get so many people? The reason why he chose to send the news to the Holy Eve's spiritual land was mainly to kill with a borrowed knife. In his imagination, the Holy Eve's spiritual land would send out 70 to 80% of their people after receiving news of Liu Ye. When the time came, they would fight with Liu Ye and he would benefit from it. However, the development of the situation was obviously not right. With so many people from the Holy Eve's spiritual land, as long as Liu Ye's brain was not kicked by a donkey, he would definitely run away immediately. Why would he stay here and wait for death? Liu Ye's spiritual land had a Tianji pillar. Liu Ye had noticed this the last time he came here with Tan Sheng and Wei Quebec. A Tianji pillar was worth 100,000 merit points. Liu Ye had managed to obtain one in the hunting ground, and now he had managed to obtain another one in the spiritual land. Liu Ye's wealth was both enviable and hateful. Only an evenly matched fight would give Liu Ye hope, and he would not escape with the help of the Tianji pillar. With such a lineup from the Holy Eve's spiritual land, how could there be any Liu Ye in the spiritual land? He was afraid that it was already empty inside. He was secretly annoyed. If he had known, he would have sent the news of the divine pillar to the Holy Eve's spiritual land as well. This way, they would have been more careful. Just as he was secretly annoyed, Huo Liaoyuan raised his hand slightly and waved it down slowly. A cold word popped out of his mouth, "Kill." In an instant, the light of many imperial artifacts and spells appeared and bombarded the location of the spirit array with great momentum. Ripples spread out and the light curtain of the spirit array appeared in front of everyone. Under such attacks, the concealment spirit array arranged by Liu Ye also lost its effect. The concealment spirit array itself did not have any defensive or offensive capabilities. The function of this spirit array was just a layer of camouflage that could hide the existence of the entire spiritual land. Even if someone were to pass by, they would not be able to detect anything without careful inspection. The few probing attacks from the Holy Eve's spiritual land just now were not enough to break the concealment spirit array's effect. Now that they were attacking together, how could the concealment spirit array hold up? The protective light curtain that enveloped the entire spiritual land appeared in front of everyone's eyes. Through the light curtain, the situation of the spiritual land was clear at a glance. The existence of many monster wolves immediately attracted the attention of the cultivators from the Holy Eve's spiritual land. Many people were shocked and could not understand how there could be so many monster wolves here. In particular, they could feel monster chi fluctuations from a few monster wolves that were comparable to Cloud River Realm 8th or 9th order cultivators. At this moment, these demonic wolves were all looking up at the sky. Although they were demonic beasts, they did not make any noise. Not even a single wolf howl could be heard. They were like a well-trained army, quietly hibernating and withdrawing their fangs and claws. The others from the Holy Eve's spiritual land did not know the situation inside the spiritual land, but Huo Liaoyuan was very clear about it. But after verifying the accuracy of the information with his own eyes, he could not help but be shocked. Could Liu Ye really control so many monster beasts? He had heard that he had a little white beast by his side, but it was too exaggerated for a Cloud River Realm cultivator to control so many monster beasts. He secretly rejoiced that he did not underestimate the other party and instead brought out enough strength to crush them. Otherwise, it would have been difficult to deal with this situation. After the initial panic, the cultivators from the Holy Eve's spiritual land slowly calmed down. The strength of their lineup gave them the confidence to deal with these monster wolves. Moreover, these monster wolves did not seem to be able to fly. As long as they were careful enough, they would not be a big threat. Chapter 601. Lu Ye didn't run away. Tan Xing exclaimed. Everyone thought that after the Holy Eve's spiritual land showed enough power, Lu Ye would definitely use the Pillar of Divine Secrets to escape back to the 9 regions. Unexpectedly, he did not leave. At this moment he was standing in the spiritual land, looking up at the sky. There was not even the slightest bit of panic on his face. That was strange. However, Tan Xing was happy to see this. If Lu Ye didn't run away, then there was hope to kill him. It seems that he won't give up this spiritual land unless he has no other choice, Xia Liang said calmly. Class A spiritual land was very valuable. Even if it was only a small spiritual land, it wasn't something that ordinary people could own. No one would give it up so easily. This is going to be a good show. Tan Xing grinned. He hid the Tianji pillar. Xia Liang looked at a certain spot in the spiritual land. The last time he came here with Tan Xing, the Tianji pillar was there. However, looking at it now, the Tianji pillar was empty. Clearly, it was hidden by an array. Hiding the divine pillar was obviously to hide its existence. What was Lu Ye trying to do? Xia Liang seemed to have thought of something and was slightly moved. If things were really as he thought, then Lu Ye was too bold. In the air, Lu Ye's figure was reflected in Huoliao Yuan's eyes when the concealment formation lost its effect. Even though it was their first time meeting, Huoliao Yuan still recognized him at first glance. His blazing eyes stared coldly at the figure below as if he was looking at a dead man. Continuous sounds were heard. Along with the chaos of spiritual energy, the cultivators of the Holy Eve's spiritual land attacked the spiritual land's protective array. The scene of more than 150 cultivators attacking at the same time was spectacular. Even though their cultivation bases were uneven, it still caused the colorful lights to be dazzling. Their power was monstrous, and the light screen of the protective formation dimmed at a speed visible to the naked eye. Then it began to tremble. Xia Liang, who had been watching this scene in the dark, frowned. The situation didn't seem to be right. This defensive array was a little too weak. The last time he came here with Xia Liang and Wei Kei, they had also attacked the defensive formation here. However, the strength of the formation at that time was much stronger than it was now. Was it because of the rearrangement? Before he could figure it out, the protective formation shattered with a loud bang. The fluorescent light drifted all over the sky, and the entire spiritual land was completely exposed to the vision of the cultivators of the Holy Eve's spiritual land. A large number of cultivators were like cats that had smelled the scent of fish. They immediately rushed forward and poured into the spiritual land. Streams of qi locked onto Lu Yi and the others from afar, bursting with killing intent. At this moment, Lu Yi, who had been standing motionless in place, moved. He took out a large array jade pendant from his bosom and poured his spiritual power into it. In the next moment, a layer of light that was even more dazzling than the formation suddenly appeared out of thin air and quickly enveloped the entire spiritual land. After the first floor, it was the second floor. However, the second floor's light curtain was vaguely different from the first floor. However, the sudden change made the cultivators of the Holy Eve's spiritual land unable to distinguish it at all. The cultivators who hadn't rushed into the spiritual land bumped into the light curtain and stopped one after another, revealing a look of astonishment. Generally speaking, there would only be one protective formation set up in a place. This was because the protective strength of the formation was directly related to the spiritual power stored on a daily basis. Even if a second one was set up, if it couldn't store too much spiritual power, it wouldn't be of much use. Instead, it would share the power of the formation. Moreover, if the invaders had the ability to break the first formation, they would certainly have the ability to break the second one. Therefore, instead of sharing the power and increasing the risk for no reason, it was better to concentrate the power in one place. However, Lu Ye's spiritual land had two protective formations. The power of the second formation was even more powerful than the first one. Xia Liang's previous guess came true. He couldn't help but exclaim in a low voice, "This guy is so vicious." Tan Xing frowned. "Brother Xia, what did you see?" Xia Liang said, "The first layer of the protective formation is just a pretense to show the enemy that it's weak. The second layer is the real protective formation." No wonder the protective formation just now gave off a very weak feeling. It was Lu Ye's intention. The Holy Eve's spiritual land was in trouble. More than 150 cultivators were now divided into two groups by the protective formation. One group had more than 70 cultivators, and they were inside the formation. The other group had less than 80 cultivators, and they were outside the formation. This sudden change shocked many of the cultivators. However, they quickly calmed down. This was because under Huoliao Yuan's lead, they were attacking with absolute power. No matter what the enemy did, it was just a last-ditch struggle. Only Huoliao Yuan frowned. He felt an inexplicable sense of uneasiness in his heart, as if something bad was about to happen. There was no need for him to give the order. The cultivators outside the formation attacked the formation once again. Since they had the ability to break the first protective formation, they naturally had the ability to break the second one. Although they had lost nearly half of their manpower, it would just take them a little more time. Inside the formation, more than 70 cultivators ignored the dense pack of demon wolves below. They all stared at Lu Ye and the others. They all flew forward, and when they were at a suitable distance, they circulated their spiritual energy and were about to attack. Lu Ye grabbed an array flag and looked up at the sky. He waved the array flag in his hand lightly. Sky restriction. The space of the entire spiritual land seemed to distort at this moment, and in the next moment, the uninvited guests who had intruded into the spiritual land all revealed looks of shock and bewilderment as they screamed and fell from the air. At this moment, everyone felt as if a huge mountain was pressing down on them. It was so heavy that they couldn't breathe. When the sudden change occurred, Xia Liang and Tan Xing, who were hiding in the dark, felt their eyelids twitch. They had suffered from the sky restriction formation before, and now that they thought about it, they couldn't help but feel a lingering fear. Huoliao Yuan's eyes widened in anger as he exclaimed, "Sky restriction formation? How could it be a sky restriction formation? How could there be a sky restriction formation?" Although he had long heard that Lu Ye of the Jade Blood Sect had extremely high attainments in Array Dao, he was only a Cloud River cultivator. How could he have the ability to set up a sky restriction formation? One had to know that even an ordinary true lake cultivator might not be able to set up such a formation. Moreover, there was no information about a sky restriction formation in the information he received. Did the person who passed on the information intentionally hide this matter? Many thoughts flashed through his mind. Huoliao Yuan was no longer as calm as before. His body turned into a fiery light as he rushed forward and shouted, "Quickly break the formation." Nearly half of the people were trapped in the formation. Under the sky restriction formation, everyone was falling. The situation was unprecedentedly bad. Before he brought people here, he had never thought that such an inconceivable thing would happen. As his voice fell, shrill cries of agony rang out one after another. Dazzling sword lights flashed through the spiritual land. The power of powerful spells began to be released. Li Baxian and Feng Yuechan had made their moves. Wherever the sword lights and spells passed, blood splattered and life dissipated. One by one, the cultivators of the Holy Eve's spiritual land lost their lives before they even landed on the ground. In just an instant, 5 or 6 people died on the spot. Giant armor charged out and leaped dozens of feet into the air. It punched the head of an unsteady Sacred Fire Sect cultivator. This Dharma cultivator did not even make a sound before his head exploded like a watermelon. Giant armor charged out of the blood mist and locked onto its second target. That cultivator was instantly frightened out of his wits. The wolf pack, which had remained motionless all this time, suddenly sprang into action. Their vigorous bodies dashed forward, and their snow-white fur fluttered in the wind. Some of the demon wolves opened their mouths as they dashed forward, shooting out green crescent-shaped wind blades, which left behind dark red marks on the bodies of their enemies. However, there were not many demon wolves that could use wind blades to attack. Most of the demon wolves directly pounced on the unsteady cultivators, biting and scratching them. The screams became even more intense and mournful. Outside the formation, the cultivators of the Holy Eve's spiritual land, led by Huo Liaoyuan, felt as if they had fallen into an ice cellar. They had originally thought that they had an absolute advantage and could crush the enemy in this battle, but it had unfolded in such an unacceptable situation. Seeing familiar faces dying one after another in front of their eyes and being torn to pieces, the anger and sorrow in everyone's hearts erupted like a volcano. "Run!" someone shouted. The cultivators who were lucky enough to survive woke up from a dream and fled outside. Some people managed to escape to the edge of the formation with great difficulty, only to find in despair that they could not escape at all. There was a thick light screen in front of them, blocking their hopes of escaping. The formation had two layers. The first layer was the defensive formation, and the second layer was the entrapment formation. From the moment these cultivators stepped into the spiritual land, they were destined to not have a good ending. "Don't come over!" The cultivators who fled to the edge of the formation screamed in horror. They only had time to wave the spiritual weapon in their hands before they were drowned by the figures of more than 10 demon wolves. The sound of flesh being torn apart could be heard, making one's hair stand on end. Xia Liang and Tan Sheng's eyelids twitched wildly. Not to mention the people of the Holy Eve's spiritual land, even they did not expect the situation to unfold like this. They thought that Lu Ye would use the Pillar of Tianji to escape back to the 9 regions the moment he saw the Holy Eve's spiritual land attacking. However, the result was that the Holy Eve's spiritual land suffered heavy losses. From the beginning to the end, Lu Ye only activated the jade pendant and waved the array flag in his hand. The effect that a powerful array cultivator could bring to bear in such a situation was actually so terrifying. Boom, boom, boom. Loud noises suddenly came from all over the spiritual land. The cultivators who were fleeing in all directions had inadvertently triggered the explosion array set up by Lu Ye. Flames surged, spiritual energy went berserk, and screams were drowned out. In just a dozen breaths of time, more than half of the cultivators in the spiritual land were dead or injured. The remaining cultivators were all shrouded in an aura of despair. Li Baxian, Feng Yuechun, and Giant Armor charged in from 3 directions, causing even more casualties to the Holy Eve's spiritual land. Chapter 602. Li Baxian and Feng Yuchun were both 6th-order Cloud River Realm cultivators, but with their profound foundation, the strength they could display was far beyond what an ordinary 6th-order Realm cultivator could compare to. As for Giant Armor, he was a monster. His body was as strong as steel. Li Baxian and Feng Yuechun had to avoid the enemy's counterattack when they were fighting, but Giant Armor didn't care at all. He just charged forward and let the enemy's attacks land on his body. His body made loud banging sounds, but they didn't affect him at all. Under normal circumstances, even though the 3 of them were strong, they couldn't possibly be a match for so many enemies. However, the cultivators of the Holy Eve's spiritual land were first suppressed by the Forbidden Sky formation, and now they were surrounded by the formation. Coupled with the attacks of the demonic wolves, they panicked and the situation was extremely chaotic, giving the 3 of them room to perform. "Break the array, quickly break the array." Huo Liaoyuan's roar resounded through the sky. His eyes were about to pop out of their sockets. As he roared, his entire body burned like a flame. The powerful aura of a 9th-order realm cultivator swept out in all directions. A huge fireball like the sun appeared in the sky and slammed into the defensive array. Under this attack, the defensive array's light barrier caved in for a moment, and its radiance dimmed a little. Many Holy Eve's spiritual land cultivators also attacked at this moment, and the scene became extremely lively. Within the spiritual land, more than 30 Holy Eve's spiritual land cultivators had died. As time passed, more cultivators died. Li Baxian and the other two's figures intertwined with each other, and the wolf pack rushed forward, playing a symphony of death. At this time, in the spiritual land, the surviving cultivators of the Holy Eve's spiritual land finally organized a defensive line. More than 30 people had their backs against the light screen of the trapping formation. The body cultivators took out large shields and blocked in front of them, building a human wall to fight against the attacking wolves. But as long as the trapping array wasn't broken, it would be difficult for them to escape. But in such a situation, self-preservation was already the limit, so how could they have the strength to break the array? Their only hope now was for Huoliao Yuan and the others to break the defensive array and come to their rescue. Loud bangs rang out one after another, and the defensive array's light barrier quickly dimmed. Although the second formation was much stronger than the first, it could not withstand the continuous attacks of so many cultivators. After all, it was only a defensive formation that Lu Yi had set up with his own strength. It was already very rare for it to be able to hold on for so long. In the spiritual land, Lu Yi was still standing in place, remotely controlling the operation of the array. A defensive array with a person controlling it was a defensive array, and one without a defensive array was completely different. Although he knew the defensive array wouldn't last long, there was no harm in holding it for a little longer. At this moment, his body suddenly moved to the side, and a short blade almost brushed past his neck and stabbed into the air. A few steps behind him, a figure appeared like a ghost. The ghost cultivator who launched the sneak attack had a shocked expression on his face, as if he did not expect Lu Yi to be able to dodge such a hidden attack. It had to be said that this ghost cultivator was very bold. Even in such a situation, he still wanted to kill Lu Yi. Their main goal this time was to kill Lu Yi. As long as they could kill Lu Yi, the losses they had suffered before would be barely acceptable. However, such a surefire attack had actually failed to succeed. Exposed, the ghost's ghost wanted to retreat, but a fiery red saber light slashed down in front of him, followed by a storm of attacks. Xiao Yang, who was observing in the dark, watched this scene quietly. The corner of his eyes twitched, and he couldn't help but recall the days when he taught Lu Yi in Fox Immortal Valley. He even taught Lu Yi the Heart's Eye secret technique. Although Lu Yi had given him a defensive tattoo, that tattoo was only a temporary tattoo and would lose its effectiveness after a few uses. Compared to what Lu Yi had obtained, how could it be compared to what Lu Yi had obtained? What shocked Xiao Yang even more was that in such a short period of time, Lu Yi had actually reached the entry level of the Heart's Eye secret technique, and from the speed of his reaction, the range of his Heart's Eye was even greater than his own. What kind of freak is he? And he's a 5th order Cloud River Realm cultivator. Xia Liang couldn't understand. What kind of elixir did he take to improve his cultivation so quickly? Thinking back to when they first met 2 months ago, this guy was only a 3rd order Cloud River Realm cultivator. Back then, he had been chasing after Yang Kai like a stray dog. Back in Fox Immortal Valley, he was only a 4th order cultivator, but after not seeing him for a few days, he had actually advanced by another realm. Pwah! The ghost's ghost was sent flying with a huge wound on his chest and abdomen. Before he landed, several monster wolves pounced on him, followed by a blood-curdling scream and the sound of flesh being torn apart. This ghost cultivator was the same as Yen Ge, whom Lu Yi had killed before. They were both 7th order Cloud River Realm cultivators, but the 7th order Cloud River Realm cultivator that Lu Yi had to exhaust all his means to kill back then was now nothing in front of him. The sound of cracking could be heard. Cracks appeared on the protective array, and it was on the verge of collapse. Although the ghost's sudden attack didn't do anything to Lu Yi, it restrained him, preventing him from controlling the array. This also allowed the Holy Eve's spirit land to break the array faster. More and more sounds could be heard until the entire array's light barrier completely collapsed. Save them! Huoliao Yuan gritted his teeth and roared. Although he couldn't wait to tear Lu Yi into pieces, he wasn't consumed by anger. Instead, he gave the correct order. Many cultivators swarmed in and passed through the trapping array's light barrier without any hindrance. They joined up with the surviving cultivators in the spirit land. While resisting the attacks of Li Baxian and the others and the wolves, They turned around and bombarded the trapping array's light barrier. The trapping array was much weaker than the protective array. If it weren't for the wolves, the trapped cultivators would have broken it long ago. With the help of their companions, it only took them 30 breaths of time to completely break the trapping array. Separated by a few hundred meters, Lu Yi and Huoliao Yuan's gazes met. One was calm as water, while the other was furious. After a few breaths, Huoliao suppressed the anger in his heart and gritted his teeth. Retreat! With this order, the cultivators of the Holy Eve's spirit land fought and retreated. Soon, they were out of the range of the spirit land. The wolves didn't chase after them. Within the range of the spirit land, there was a sky restriction array. They could still fight with the cultivators. However, once they were out of the spirit land, the cultivators could fly. The threat posed by the wolves was greatly reduced. The cultivators fled back in a sorry state. Each and every one of them had lingering fears. Some of the more mentally fragile female cultivators even began to cry. Throughout their journey of cultivation, they had more or less experienced some dangers, but they had never felt as helpless as they did now. When they were trapped in the spirit land, the aura of death was like an invisible beast licking their souls. They were on the verge of collapse. So many senior and junior brothers that they were familiar with died tragically beside them. After today, this battle was destined to be a nightmare that they couldn't escape from for the rest of their lives. Lu Ye, you will die without a doubt. Huoliao Yuan roared. He clenched his teeth so hard that blood seeped out. He thought that this was an easy task. However, in the end, he suffered heavy losses. From start to finish, it had only been 10 minutes. As the decision-maker and guide of this operation, he would definitely be held accountable in the future. Perhaps he would even be punished by the sect. The culprit behind all this was Lu Yi. The hatred in his heart toward Lu Yi was so deep that even the 3 rivers and 5 lakes couldn't wash it away. There was also that sneaky person who secretly leaked the information. He had previously guessed that the person who secretly leaked the information must have suffered a great loss at the hands of Lu Yi. Thus, he wanted to kill with a borrowed knife. He had already overestimated the strength of Lu Ye's side based on the information he obtained. Otherwise, he wouldn't have brought so many people. However, as soon as he came into contact with Lu Yi, his own side was defeated. Before coming, he didn't think that he would encounter such a setback. However, it happened right under his nose. Sky Restriction Array. How could a Cloud River tier set up such a sky restriction array? In the Spirit Land, Lu Yi looked at him calmly. He didn't say a word. There was no smugness of victory. Then he waved the array flag, and the concealment array came into effect again. It covered the entire Spirit Land and disappeared from everyone's sight. This calm response made Huoliao Yuan even more furious. He was about to explode. Senior Brother Hua. An 8th Order cultivator came to Huoliao Yuan's side. He had many wounds on his body, and there were bloodstains on his face. Obviously, he had gone through a tough battle. What do we do now? Huoliao Yuan looked around and saw faces full of lingering fear and panic, as well as the joy of surviving a disaster. He had brought more than 150 people here, but less than 100 were still alive. In other words, more than 60 people had died in the Spirit Land in the short time it took to drink a cup of tea. Huoliao Yuan's mouth twitched. His mind was in a mess, and he didn't know what to do. With their current strength, if they organized a wave of attacks, they might have a chance to kill Lu Yi, but they would definitely suffer more casualties. They had already lost so many people, so how could he dare to lose more? The other side obviously wouldn't counterattack. In the Spirit Land, the other side had the help of the Sky Restriction Array, which could greatly reduce the strength of the cultivators. This gave the monster wolves the capital to participate in the battle. If they really counterattacked, they would only be courting death. In other words, in this situation, no matter who it was, the side that took the initiative to attack would suffer. Rest here and wait for reinforcements. After a long while, Huoliao Yuan's dry lips squeezed out a sentence. Sacred Flame Sect and Universe Sect still had many people they could mobilize, but it would take more time. If 100 people couldn't do it, then 200. If 200 wasn't enough, then 300. No matter what, Lu Yi had to die. After the order was given, the 8th Order cultivator was obviously relieved. He was really afraid that Huo Liaoyuan would do something unwise in his anger. The spirit ship floating in the air slowly descended. The Holy Eve's spirit land cultivators were in a sorry state. They set up camp at the entrance of returning Heaven Valley and began to recuperate. In the dark, Xia Liang and Tan Xing were silent. They were hiding here to reap the benefits, but in the end, they were watching an unimaginable show. They had mixed feelings. Chapter 603. In less than 10 minutes after the battle at Huitian Valley, Tu Guanxiong received the news from the cultivators of Huanyu sect. After reading it, he was shocked. Under the leadership of Huo Liaoyuan, not only did the cultivators of the two sects fail to break through Luoye's spirit land, but they also suffered a great loss. Heavy losses. There were 63 dead cultivators, 45 from Sacred Flame sect and 18 from Huanyu sect. It was a simple line of words, but the suffocating smell of blood filled the air. Tu Guanxiong could not believe it and personally sent a message to Huo Liaoyuan to ask. After confirming it, he was stunned. How could this be? How could this be? Huo Liaoyuan took away more than 70 cultivators from the Holy Eve's spirit land. He gathered about the same number of Sacred Flame sect cultivators. How could there be such heavy losses when they gathered more than 150 people to deal with Luoye? So what if the other party could control the wolf pack? After sending another message to a few Huanyu sect cultivators, Tu Guanxiong finally understood the source of the heavy losses. It was the flight restriction array. The Holy Eve's spirit land did not have a flight restriction array, but Luoye had one? How high was this guy's attainment in the array Dao? The first layer of the defensive formation showed weakness to the enemy, isolating the cultivators of the two sects who rushed into the spiritual land. For a moment, they couldn't coordinate with each other. The sudden attack of the forbidden flight formation caught the cultivators of the two sects in the spiritual land off guard. Under the premise that they couldn't fly freely, they had to face the large number of demon wolves. It was naturally difficult for them to do anything. After understanding all this, Tu Guanxiong let out a heavy sigh. Although he was angry at Fire Prairie for not being careful enough, he couldn't blame him for anything. Anyone in Fire Prairie's position would be powerless when faced with such a situation. After thinking for a moment, he could only send a message to Huo Liaoyuan. He told him that he would gather the Huanyu sect disciples who were scattered nearby to help. He told him not to act rashly before his subordinates gathered enough strength. This was also Huo Liaoyuan's plan, so he naturally agreed. A moment later, a large number of cultivators of the two sects received the message and rushed in the direction of Taimang Mountain. However, these cultivators were from different distances. The fastest would take 7 to 8 days to rush over, and the slowest would take 10 to 20 days. They could not be counted on at the moment. In the spiritual land of Huitian Valley, several people were cleaning up the messy battlefield and collecting the spoils of war. Li Baxian and the others were fine, and only a few demon wolves had perished in battle. Compared to the results of the battle, such losses were practically negligible. However, Giant Armor was a little sad. Although the wolves had willingly followed him back then, it had annoyed him to no end. However, after spending so much time together, he had changed his mind. The spiritual land could be placed in Huitian Valley. It was all thanks to the protection of the wolf pack. For the spiritual land, this wolf pack was the most solid shield, not the defensive array set up by Lu Yi. Facts proved that if it weren't for the help of the wolf pack today, no matter how many spirit arrays Lu Yi had set up, it would have been useless. There were only 4 of them in total, so no matter how many enemies they could kill, how many could they kill? Therefore, even though only a few demon wolves had died, Giant Armor was still very sad. In the spiritual land, Li Baxian looked at the entrance of the valley and slowly said, "Little junior brother, the people of the Holy Eve's spiritual land are stationed at the entrance of the valley. It seems that they are waiting for reinforcements." In today's battle, the Holy Eve's spiritual land had suffered huge losses. After realizing that there was a sky-sealing array here, they would definitely not take the initiative to attack again. However, The other side had suffered such a big loss and did not retreat. Instead, they put on a defensive posture, as if they were afraid that Lu Yi and the others would run away. They were obviously gathering more people. Once the other side gathered enough helpers, they would definitely storm the spiritual land. Do you want me to call some people to help? Li Baxin asked. Lu Yi shook his head. It's easy to pay 1,000 gold, but hard to repay a favor. We should settle our own matters and not trouble others. Although with Li Baxin and Feng Yuechan's connections, it would not be a problem to call for some helpers, but last time in the hunting ground, when Lu Yi was being chased by many myriad Demon Ridge powerhouses, Li Baxin had already asked for help. These debts of gratitude were all on Li Baxin's shoulders. If he asked for help again today, the burden would only increase. Hearing what he said, Li Baxin sighed. That's true. Lu Yi said, before today, if we were to escape back to the 9 regions, it wouldn't matter. But after today, if we want to escape back to the 9 regions, the loss is not just a matter of the Pillar of Tianji and the Spring Spirit. Li Baxin was slightly startled, but soon understood what he meant. The few of them could escape back to the 9 regions and get rid of the trouble here, but the wolf pack could not leave. In today's battle, dozens of cultivators from the 2 sects were killed by the wolf pack. Once they left, the anger of the 2 sects cultivators was bound to be vented on the wolf pack. At that time, how many of the wolf pack could survive? They would probably be wiped out soon. Based on this concern, Giant Armor might not be willing to abandon the wolf pack and return to the 9 regions with them. If Giant Armor did not leave, how could they leave? Compared to the Holy Eve's spiritual land, I am more concerned about another matter. Lu Yi frowned slightly. What is it? Xia Liang and Tan Xing. Lu Yi said the names of the 2. The Holy Eve's spiritual land was able to find the location of the spiritual land so accurately and even dispatched so many people at once. They obviously have some understanding of the situation of our spiritual land. This information could only be leaked by Xia Liang and Tan Xing, but I didn't see the 2 of them today. Moreover, although the Holy Eve's spiritual land has a lot of information, there are 2 things that they are unclear about. First, they don't know that there is a forbidden sky formation in the spiritual land, otherwise they would not have been so careless today. Second, they don't know that we have the Pillar of Tianji. If they knew that there was a Pillar of Tianji in the spiritual land, the people of the Holy Eve's spiritual land might not have been willing to come all the way here, because even if they really forced Lu Yi into a desperate situation, he could still use the Pillar of Tianji to return to the 9 regions. So, the information that Xia Liang and Tan Xing revealed was somewhat reserved. Lu Yi nodded. Hiding the existence of the Pillar of Tianji is nothing more than to sit on the mountain and watch the tigers fight, waiting for an opportunity to reap the benefits. As for not revealing the forbidden sky formation, it is probably to intensify the hatred. In that case, these 2 people must be hiding in the dark. How sinister! As he spoke, Lu Yi stood up. Senior brother, I'm going to scout out their location. At the very least, we have to make these hidden enemies appear on the surface. We can't let these 2 dogs spy on us in the dark. Li Baxin hurriedly stopped him. It's too dangerous. If we continue to wait, we will only be sitting ducks. Don't worry, senior brother, I am confident. If we fight, I am definitely not their match, but it will not be that easy for them to kill me. Then I will go with you. Lu Yi laughed. Senior brother, don't you know what kind of abilities I have? If you go with me, I won't be able to use those methods. Li Baxin still wanted to say something, but Feng Yuechan, who had been standing silently at the side, tugged at his sleeve and said, Junior brother Lu is right. If we continue to wait, we will only be sitting ducks. We still have to think of a way to break out of this situation. Junior brother Lu has the means of a ghost cultivator. Senior brother, you will only cause trouble if you go with him. Li Baxin frowned and did not say anything. Feng Yuechan took out a small umbrella. Junior brother Lu, if you insist on going alone, then refine this and take it with you. Otherwise, your senior brother and I will not agree. Lu Yi looked at the small umbrella. Although he did not know what kind of power it had, it must have extremely strong defensive power since Feng Yuechan took it out at this time. But he did not refuse Feng Yuechan's good intentions. He took the small umbrella and silently sensed it. To his surprise, he found that it was actually a magic tool. Cloud River tier cultivators naturally could not activate the full power of magic tools, just like Hao Yi could not activate the full power of the nine-front formation. Her strength was not enough, and she had not reached that level. Moreover, forcefully activating this thing would definitely consume a lot of energy. However, with this thing in hand, he would at least have some life-saving means. However, if he wanted to unleash its power, he would still have to refine it. Lu Yi immediately activated his spiritual power to refine it. With the cooperation of the original owner, Feng Yuechan, it was not difficult. After he finished refining it, Lu Yi found out that this small umbrella not only had extremely strong defensive power, but it also had the ability to hide one's aura. However, when it was activated, it could not be moved, which was similar to the disappearance bracelet that Lu Yi had previously obtained. This effect was not very useful to Lu Yi. He could construct concealment and aura concealment spiritual tattoos. With the support of these two spiritual tattoos, his concealment ability was stronger than ordinary ghost cultivators. There was no need to rely on external objects. At this time, the moon was high in the sky, and it was late at night. It was a good time to act. Lu Yi walked straight to a corner of the house, where there was a transportation formation that had been set up a few days ago. The people of the Holy Eve's spiritual land had set up camp at the entrance of the valley. They would definitely be on guard against the situation at the spiritual land, and there would be people monitoring the movements here at all times. However, the spiritual land was covered by a concealment formation, and they could not see the situation inside. If Lu Yi walked out from inside, it would definitely affect the concealment formation, and some traces would be exposed. If he directly teleported out, he would not have to worry about this problem. Standing on the transportation formation, Lu Ye's mind connected to the location of the other transportation points. Li Baxian was still worried and warned, "Little junior brother, you must be careful." Lu Yi nodded, and the space around him distorted slightly, and his figure disappeared. In a mountain more than 200 miles away from Huitian's spiritual land, there was a hidden cave. Suddenly, there was a surge of spiritual power in the cave, and Lu Ye's figure appeared. He immediately sensed the surroundings and did not detect any aura of life. Only then did he walk out of the cave. He did not take out a spiritual weapon to avoid leaving too obvious traces. Urging his spiritual power, he flew into the air and flew straight in the direction of Huitian Valley. Previously, the wolf pack went out to hunt every few days, which led to few monsters within 1,000 miles of Huitian Valley. This made it convenient for Lu Yi to move at this moment. Otherwise, if he encountered a few monsters on the way, it would only be troublesome. But even so, he did not fly too high, and only flew out about 10 feet above the ground. It was not until he was about 30 to 50 miles away from Huitian Valley that Lu Yi landed and completely disappeared with the help of aura concealment. Chapter 604. Lu Yi speculated that since Tan Sheng and Xia Liang were hiding in the dark, they should not be too far away from returning Heaven Valley. They could be anywhere from 10 to 30 kilometers away. Moreover, they had to avoid the cultivators of the two sects from the Holy Eve's spirit land, so they definitely would not be near the entrance of returning Heaven Valley. Returning Heaven Valley was surrounded by mountains on 3 sides, especially the back, where there was a rugged cliff that was not suitable for hiding. There were only 2 sides left for Xia Liang and Tan Xing to choose from. This made it easier for Lu Yi to search. However, under the premise of concealing himself, Lu Ye's movements were not fast, so even if he had a rough location, it would not be easy to find the two. Fortunately, Lu Ye's luck had always been good. In less than 2 hours, Lu Yi sensed the aura of life nearby. This place was only 10 kilometers away from returning Heaven Valley, which was within his range of judgment. He quietly crept forward and soon, under the moonlight, he found 2 figures sitting cross-legged under a tree. Taking a closer look, who else could it be but Xia Liang and Tan Sheng? Lu Yi did not continue to approach. These 2 were both Cloud River Realm 9th Order cultivators, especially Xia Liang, who had sharp senses. If he got too close, he was afraid that they would notice him. After confirming their location, Lu Yi left silently. Xia Liang, who was meditating, suddenly opened his eyes and looked around. He frowned slightly. Just now, he had an inexplicable feeling that he was being spied on. However, after careful investigation, there was no one around. So, he just took it as an illusion and didn't pay attention to it. At the entrance of returning Heaven Valley, the cultivators of the two sects gathered in groups of 3 to 5. The atmosphere was a little gloomy, and many female cultivators were secretly sobbing. What happened during the day was like a nightmare for all of them. Under the leadership of Huoliao Yuan, they came aggressively, but in just a cup of tea's time, more than 60 of them died in returning Heaven Valley. The lingering fear made them feel cold, and only the flickering bonfire in front of them brought a little negligible warmth. Some were angry, gritting their teeth and shouting that they must kill Lu Yi to avenge their dead companions. At this moment, it was the darkest before dawn. A short scream pierced through the night sky, instantly alarming everyone. "What's the matter?" Huoliao Yuan arrived in a flash. When he looked over, his eyes almost popped out of their sockets. 2 figures were lying in a pool of blood on the ground. One of them was still alive, but he didn't look like he would live for much longer. "Lu Yi." That person clutched at his throat, blood spurting out from the gaps between his fingers. He raised his hand and grabbed in the direction of Fire Prairie, his eyes filled with desire. Senior brother, Huoliao raised his head abruptly and saw a fiery red stream of light flying away in the night sky. He was furious. His figure shot up into the sky and chased in that direction, quickly closing the distance between them. Anger and killing intent filled his heart, and he didn't notice that Lu Yi wasn't heading towards Huitian Valley. Logically speaking, the safest way for Lu Yi to kill someone was to escape back to Huitian Valley. Once he escaped back to Huitian Valley, the cultivators of the two sects wouldn't be able to do anything to him, no matter how powerful they were. However, he didn't fly in the direction of Huitian Valley. Instead, he chose another direction. That direction was where Tan Sheng and Xia Liang were hiding. Feeling the movement behind him, Lu Yi looked back and frowned. A 9th-order cultivator was indeed a 9th-order cultivator. His speed was ridiculously fast. Although his cultivation had increased by 2 minor realms recently, and his flying speed was much faster than when he was in the hunting ground. He was also faster than an average 5th-order cultivator, but he was still far from a 9th-order cultivator. Fortunately, he still had wind travel. With the support of the wind travel spirit tattoo, the spirit energy river in his body flowed rapidly, and his speed rose sharply. Even so, the distance between them was still closing. A wind travel spirit tattoo alone wasn't enough to let him escape the pursuit of a 9th-order cultivator, but if he used his flight wings, his speed would increase even more. He should be able to catch up to Fire Prairie. However, he didn't want to escape from Fire Prairie, so he didn't use his flight wings. Tan Sheng and Xia Liang were still meditating. Suddenly, the sound of something breaking through the air came from afar. Both of them were alarmed and raised their heads to look. In the air, 2 streams of light were rushing towards them, one in front and one behind. The 2 streams of light looked like burning flames. This is... Tan Sheng didn't realize what was going on for a moment. He only vaguely felt that the figure in the stream of light in front of him was somewhat familiar. In the blink of an eye, the stream of light arrived in front of them. "Lu Yi!" Xia Liang exclaimed in a low voice. He was stunned for a moment. Why was Lu Yi not hiding in the spirit land? Why did he come out? And from the looks of it, it seemed like he was being chased. Just when Xia Liang instinctively wanted to stop them, Lu Yi, who was flying over their heads, suddenly raised his hand and sent out a fire phoenix technique towards the 2 of them. At the same time, he shouted in a low voice, "I'll leave it to you." As soon as he finished speaking, he flashed past. Xia Liang and Tan Sheng didn't know what was going on, but how could they miss such a heaven-sent opportunity? They easily blocked the fire phoenix technique and flew up into the air. However, before they could chase after Lu Yi, Fire Prairie, who was right behind him, activated a violent spell to attack the 2 of them. Huoliao Yuan had chased them all the way here and was filled with anger. He only wanted to kill Lu Yi to vent the hatred in his heart, but the sudden appearance of two Ninth Order masters was like a bucket of cold water that poured over his heart. Coupled with Lu Ye's previous words, the anger in his heart instantly dissipated, leaving only panic and panic. He was afraid that he had fallen into Lu Ye's trap. This bastard had somehow found two powerful helpers to ambush him here and then lured him here. He didn't have any helpers around him right now, so he was afraid he would die here. Because of this worry, how could he dare to hold back? Xia Liang and Tan Xing, who were about to chase after Lu Yi, were immediately stunned and could only fight back. For a time, the three figures fought fiercely in midair. In just a moment, Xia Liang vaguely realized, it turned out that the feeling of being spied on was not an illusion. Lu Yi had indeed been here, otherwise, he wouldn't have known where he and Tan Xing were hiding and even lured Huoliao Yuan here. Is he trying to kill with a borrowed knife? Or does he simply not want me and Tan Xing to hide in the dark? It's very likely the latter. Stop! Xia Liang shouted angrily as he slashed out with his sword. At the same time, he stopped and retreated to show his sincerity. Tan Xing immediately came to his side. A few dozen meters away, Huoliao Yuan looked calm on the surface, but his heart was filled with shock because the two Ninth Order masters he was fighting were each stronger than the other. With the two of them working together, he couldn't compete at all. In that short period of time, he almost thought that he was going to die, but he didn't expect the other party to stop first. And the saber-wielding weapon cultivator? Wild Saber Sect? Huoliao Yuan recalled the Ninth Order cultivator of this generation of Wild Saber Sect and blurted out a name, "You're Xia Liang." Xia Liang's face was cold and he didn't speak. No one would be in a good mood after being schemed against like this. What's more, he and Tan Xing had originally planned to hide in the dark, but now, with Lu Ye's interference, their existence was exposed. Silence was a tacit agreement. Huoliao Yuan relaxed. Fortunately, Xia Liang is from Wild Saber Sect, and Wild Saber Sect is from Myriad Demon Ridge. It's good that he's not an enemy. This fellow Taoist is. Huoliao Yuan looked at Tan Xing. Tan Xing cupped his fists helplessly. Tan Xing from New Moon Sect. Huoliao Yuan returned the greeting, Huoliao Yuan from Sacred Flame Sect. He then asked, "Why are you two fellow Taoists here?" As soon as he spoke, he suddenly realized something. His originally kind expression changed slightly, and his eyes narrowed. There was no reason for two Ninth Order cultivators to hide here for no reason, especially when a battle broke out here during the day. Moreover, he heard that the operation against Lu Ye in the hunting ground was led by these two. In the end, Lu Ye killed his way into the Spirit Stream battlefield, destroyed New Moon Sect's encampment, and extorted a lot of benefits from Wild Saber Sect. These two had a great grudge with Lu Ye to begin with. Tan Xing turned to look at Xia Liang, but the other party said calmly, "I was just passing by." Who his fellow Taoist were chasing just now? Tan Xing was convinced. To be able to say these words without changing his expression, he was definitely not as good as him. "I was just passing by." Huoliao Yuan clenched his fists, and the flesh on his face trembled. It was obvious that he was suppressing the anger in his heart. How could he, who had vaguely seen through the truth, not know that the reason why the disciples of the two sects had suffered so much this time was because he had underestimated the enemy, but the main reason was that these two had concealed some important information. If he had known that there was a space sealing array in Lu Ye's spirit land, how could he have let the disciples of the two sects rush in? He had always been curious as to who had passed on the information to him. Now he finally understood. They must have been secretly observing during the day, but now they were pretending not to know. Huoliao Yuan wanted to throw a big fireball at Xia Liang's face to see how thick his skin was, but he could only suppress the anger in his heart. Not to mention that Sacred Flame Sect was a 4th-grade sect and couldn't afford to offend Wild Saber Sect. Now was not the time to fall out with these two. Since he couldn't beat them, what could he do? The person I was chasing was Lu Ye. When Huoliao Yuan said this, he had already calmed down. "Oh, Lu Ye." Xia Liang raised his eyebrows as if he had just found out. The Lu Ye from Jade Blood Sect? What bullshit are you asking? Huo Liao Yuan's suppressed anger almost surged up again. That's right. That's truly a coincidence. Brother Tan and I were searching for his whereabouts as well. Never had we imagined that he would actually be right under our noses. This is truly a case of searching high and low for something, yet finding it without any effort. Haha. Huo Liao Yuan gave a fake smile. Tan Xing said, Fellow Taoist Hua, we were used by Luya just now, and he was lucky enough to escape. Fellow Taoist Hua, please forgive us. Chapter 605. I wouldn't dare. Huo Liao Yuan replied through gritted teeth. Suddenly, a fluctuation of spirit energy came from afar. Huo Liao Yuan turned his head and found that the source of the movement was the Holy Eve's spiritual land cultivators' encampment. Not good. Huo Liao Yuan shouted and immediately realized what had happened. Luya had taken advantage of the time when he was busy with Xia Liang and Tan Xing to go around and kill his way back. He didn't have time to say anything to Xia Liang and Tan Xing. He turned around and rushed towards the entrance of returning Sky Valley. Xia Liang and Tan Xing looked at each other and Xia Liang said, Let's go and take a look. Since they had been exposed, there was no need to hide anymore. At the entrance of returning Sky Valley, Huo Liao Yuan hurried back and found that 2 more disciples had been killed and lying in a pool of blood. Where are they? Huo Liao Yuan asked. A Sacred Flame sect disciple replied, They escaped. Huo Liao Yuan's blood boiled. He had nowhere to vent his anger. At the same time, he was puzzled. Lu Ye was a weapon cultivator. How could he use the means of a ghost cultivator? Even with the help of a spirit talisman, he shouldn't have been able to appear and disappear so mysteriously. The other party had attacked twice and 5 cultivators had died. Although the losses were negligible compared to the losses during the day, this kind of enemy hiding in the dark was the most terrifying. Initially, he wanted to stay here and wait for his side to gather enough manpower before attacking the spiritual land. However, that would take time. If they continued to wait, their losses would only be greater. When the time came, they might lose more people than they had gathered. Retreating from here was a good choice, but where could they retreat to? Moreover, if they retreated, who knew if Luya would escape? If they missed this opportunity, they might not have such a good opportunity again. Feeling the anxious atmosphere, Huo Liao Yuan knew that he had to end the battle quickly if he wanted to take down Luya. He turned to look at Xia Liang and Tan Xing and said with a serious expression, Fellow Taoists, how about joining forces? Of course, Yang Kai hated these two, but in the current situation, he needed to borrow their strength. The strength of 2 Ninth Order Cloud River Realm cultivators could not be underestimated. If he could borrow their strength, he might have a chance to succeed. Xia Liang pondered for a moment and said, Joining forces is not a problem. However, if the other party hides in the spiritual land, what can we do even if we join forces? Unless fellow Taoist Hua is willing to attack by force. However, I believe that fellow Taoist Hua is unwilling to take this step, right? Although the Holy Eve's spiritual land had suffered heavy losses, it did not mean that they did not have the capital to attack. However, even if they could take down Luyi, they would still suffer heavy losses. Xia Liang did not think that the Fire Prairie would lose their minds to such an extent. Huo Liao Yuan said indifferently, How can you be so sure that I won't attack by force? Xia Liang's expression couldn't help but change as he looked at Huo Liao Yuan in surprise, but he couldn't tell what he was thinking. Huo Liao Yuan looked in the direction of the Spirit Land and said indifferently, After dawn, we'll attack Huitian Valley. At that time, we'll need your help. After we're done, I'll give you 20% of the bounty on Luya. This time, not only was Xia Liang surprised, even Tan Xing was confused. Huo Liao Yuan was obviously very confident in taking down Luya. However, if they attacked by force, both sides would suffer heavy losses. Was Huo Liao Yuan really willing to do this? 40%. Xia Liang couldn't understand, but it didn't stop him from bargaining. Huo Liao Yuan shook his head and said, Fellow Taoist Xia, you must be joking. Although the two of you are strong, to me, you're just icing on the cake. Even without your help, Lu Ye will definitely die. I'm willing to give you 20% of the bounty just to reduce the Holy Eve's spiritual land's losses. If the two of you aren't willing to join forces, I won't force you. He acted as if he had Lu Yi under his control, which confused Xia Liang and Tan Xing. After a moment of silence, Xia Liang said, "Fellow Taoist Hua, you might not know this, but there's actually a divine pillar in Lu Yi's spiritual land." He had never revealed this information before. During the battle during the day, the location of the divine pillar was also concealed, so the cultivators of the two sects did not notice it. Huo Liaoyuan was surprised. "Are you sure?" "I saw it with my own eyes." Xia Liang nodded. "So no matter what plans you have, if you really want to kill him, you must seize the location of the divine pillar as soon as possible. You must not let Lu Yi get close." "I understand. I'll arrange this matter later." Huo Liaoyuan nodded. Xia Liang looked at him deeply and said, "It's good that you know what to do." After a few simple sentences, they confirmed the matter of joining forces. Xia Liang and Tan Xing found a secluded place to meditate. Huo Liaoyuan also gave the order to attack Huitian Valley after daybreak. Although the cultivators of the two sects had yet to recover from the trauma of the previous battle, they began to sharpen their weapons and secretly prepare. Xia Liang and Tan Xing held back for a long time. Tan Xing couldn't help but ask softly, "Brother Xia, do you really think that Huo Liaoyuan will attack Lu Yi's spiritual land?" "Since he said so, it must be true." Tan Xing shook his head slightly. "Although this is the first time we've met, Huo Liaoyuan is a scheming person. The Holy Eve's spiritual land has already suffered great losses. If we attack forcefully, even if we take down Lu Yi, the losses will outweigh the gains. Why would such a person make such a decision? He's even willing to share 20% of the profits with us. Brother Xia, we should be careful. Huo Liaoyuan isn't very friendly to us." Xia Liang nodded. "I know. We'll act according to the situation tomorrow. But I'm concerned about something else." "What is it?" "Huo Liaoyuan didn't ask me about the location of Lu Yi's divine pillar." Xia Liang was confused. His decision to reveal the Tianji pillar to the Fire Prairie was naturally not out of kindness. Instead, he was afraid that the Fire Prairie would push Lu Yi too far and force him to leave. At that time, all his efforts would be for naught. However, Huo Liaoyuan was surprised when he heard the news, but he didn't ask anything else. This was obviously abnormal. It was as if the existence of the divine pillar didn't interfere with his plan at all. Therefore, there was no need to ask about it in detail. Tan Xing recalled their conversation and quickly realized this. He frowned and said, "What is he trying to do?" "No matter what he's trying to do, we'll know in the morning." It wasn't far from dawn. More than 2 hours later, the sky gradually brightened. Under Huo Liaoyuan's command, the cultivators of the two sects who were already prepared launched an attack on the spiritual land. In an instant, the concealment formation lost its effect and the scenery of the spiritual land was imprinted in their vision. There was no defensive formation to obstruct them because Lu Yi didn't set it up. Lu Yi flashed out of the spiritual land and frowned when he saw nearly 100 cultivators approaching the edge of the spiritual land. Was this a forceful attack? No matter how angry Huo Liaoyuan was, he wouldn't make such a stupid decision, right? Did he not care about the lives of his subordinates? Or was it that his 2 sneak attacks yesterday made him so angry that he lost his mind? However, looking at the opponent's orderly formation, it didn't seem to be the case. Li Baxian, Feng Yuechen, and Giant Armor appeared together and stood beside Lu Yi. "Little junior brother. The situation isn't good this time." Lu Yi's expression was solemn. He saw Xia Liang and Tan Xing's figures in the opponent's camp. This was within his expectations. Xia Liang and Tan Xing, who were hiding in the dark, were forced out by him. The best choice was naturally to join forces with the Holy Eve's spiritual land. It seemed to strengthen the enemy's strength, but in fact, the vipers hiding in the dark were the most terrifying. Now that they were in the open, the threat level was reduced by a lot. Lu Yi turned to look at Giant Armor. "If we can't stop them, use the Tianji pillar to escape back to the 9 states, understand?" He wasn't worried about Li Baxian and Feng Yuechen. They would definitely run if the situation was not right. He was only worried about Giant Armor. After a few demon wolves died yesterday, Giant Armor was immersed in a sorrowful atmosphere for the entire day. He might not be willing to abandon the wolf pack and escape. Giant Armor glanced at the nearby demon wolves and remained silent. If you die, you'll lose everything. If you live, you can still take revenge. Lu Yi persuaded earnestly. Giant Armor lowered his head and remained silent. Lu Yi couldn't help but sigh and stopped persuading him. Kill. Outside the spiritual land, the cultivators of the Holy Eve's spiritual land stepped into the area covered by the air-sealing spell formation along with Huo Liao Yuan's angry roar. After what happened yesterday, they naturally couldn't fly in the air. The returning heaven spiritual land was a small spiritual land and didn't occupy a large area. However, in order to take care of the wolf pack, Lu Yi set up a large array. Whether it was the concealment array, the protection array, or the air-sealing spell formation, they were all far larger than the spiritual land itself. They covered a radius of a few hundred feet. The cultivators of the Holy Eve's spiritual land stepped into the edge of the array. They were still a few hundred feet away from Lu Yi and the others. This distance was naturally not within the attack range. Many cultivators marched forward in unison, pressuring the spiritual land. Everyone's spiritual energy was surging, ready to strike at any moment. The wolf pack also moved. They bared their teeth and the demon energy around them surged. A great battle was about to break out. It wasn't until they were less than 100 feet away that the cultivators of the Holy Eve's spiritual land attacked together under Huo Liao Yuan's command. In an instant, the light of imperial equipment and spells bloomed and surged toward the wolf pack. At the same time, the wolf pack also counterattacked with wind blades. However, they were much fewer in number than the cultivators. After all, there weren't many demon wolves that could use this demonic technique. The wolf pack was undoubtedly at a disadvantage in such a long-distance battle. The head wolf clearly understood this and howled toward the sky. In the next moment, the wolf pack rushed forward. Wolf howls echoed from afar as snow-white figures dashed forward. The distance of 100 feet was quickly closed. Some of the demon wolves were hit by spells or imperial equipment, causing them to stagger. However, the demon wolves were strong and had demon essence to protect their bodies. As long as the demon essence was not broken, their lives would not be in danger. Giant Armor's burly figure was mixed in with the wolf pack. Li Baxian and Feng Yuechan followed closely behind the wolf pack. 100 swords flew and spells buzzed, showing off their powerful foundation. Only Lu Yi remained in the same place. He only activated the 9 imperial equipment on his waist to relieve the pressure of the wolf pack. The battle erupted and the scene instantly became lively. Chapter 606. Withstanding the attacks of numerous imperial equipment and spells, leaving a trail of blood along the way, the demon wolves pounced in front of the cultivators of the Holy Eve's spiritual land. They leapt high into the air, and their sharp fangs and claws flickered with cold light. The Holy Eve's spiritual land cultivators had already prepared for this. The body cultivators and weapon cultivators blocked the monster wolves at the front, while the spirit cultivators and ghost cultivators took advantage of the situation to counterattack. The howls and roars of the wolves merged together. The number of demon wolves was more than twice that of the cultivators from the Holy Eve's spiritual land. However, even though they were all demon generals, the techniques they could use were not as rich as the cultivators, so the situation was in a deadlock for a while. The monster wolves were unable to break through the defensive line organized by the cultivators, and the cultivators were unable to take another step forward. Standing in the spiritual land, Lu Yi controlled his imperial equipment while observing the battlefield. He saw the giant armor roaring, attracting the attention of many cultivators. Many attacks landed on him, making banging sounds. The spirit light on his body flickered wildly, and many cultivators exclaimed in surprise. They probably did not expect that there would be someone in this world with such a strong physique. He saw Xia Liang and Tan Xing mixed in with the Holy Eve's spiritual land cultivators, constantly attacking. With just the two of them, the defense of that area was impregnable. These two were obviously holding back. If 2 Cloud River Realm 9th Order cultivators went all out, it would be enough to cause a lot of trouble for the monster wolves in front of them. However, although the monster wolves in front of them were constantly pushed back, they quickly surged forward. It was understandable. With so many people from the Holy Eve's spiritual land mobilizing, if the two of them did not hold back, how could they pull chestnuts out of the fire? From the looks of it, their cooperation with the Holy Eve's spiritual land was only superficial. Everything seemed normal, but everything was so abnormal. Search. This battle had erupted too hastily. If Fire Prairie really wanted to attack the spiritual land, yesterday would have been the best opportunity. They should not have dragged it out until today. So many of them had died yesterday. Although the death of their companions would cause many cultivators to panic, it would also trigger their hatred and anger to the greatest extent. If the Fire Prairie had given the order to attack yesterday, they would not have been able to keep the spiritual land. A night of rest would not allow the Holy Eve's spiritual land cultivators to gain more strength. On the contrary, it would make them worry about gains and losses. Why did Fire Prairie attack? Just because of his actions last night? Or was it because of Xia Liang and Tan Sheng's help? Lu Yi didn't quite understand. Although the battle was intense, there were very few casualties, be it cultivators or demon wolves. This was because even though the cultivators of the Holy Eve's spiritual land had taken the initiative to attack, they had assumed a defensive posture. As such, the casualties were naturally not that great. This was clearly an order given by the Fire Prairie in advance. Looking at the current situation, it seemed that the Holy Eve's spiritual land would win as long as they could withstand the demon wolf's counterattack. This was completely contrary to their offensive strategy. If they really wanted to attack, they should have disregarded all losses and charged into the spiritual land. They would have killed every wolf they saw and killed every person they saw. They would have slaughtered every single person they saw and turned the spiritual land upside down. They should not have defended their camp so tightly that it was impenetrable. Moreover, from the beginning of the battle, Lu Yi had felt an aura firmly locking onto him. That was the aura of the Fire Prairie. Fire Prairie's eyes burned with fury as he roared, "Lu Yi, get over here and accept your death." He looked as if his mind had been twisted by hatred. Lu Yi ignored his words. While controlling his 9 Dao Imperial equipment, he raised his hand and an array flag appeared in his hand. If not for the fact that he had to control the array, he would have charged over with his saber. Why would he just stand there and do nothing? The protective array and trap array of the spiritual land had been broken. He didn't set it up again because it was meaningless. However, it didn't mean that there were no other arrays in the spiritual land. The moment he saw the array flag in Lu Ye's hand, Fire Prairie's expression changed. He shouted, "Be careful!" As he said that, Lu Yi waved the array flag in his hand. A loud explosion accompanied by flames shot into the sky, followed by screams. Huo Yaoyuan immediately turned his head to look and saw that a hole had been torn in the front line where his own cultivators were. Around the hole, 7 or 8 cultivators were covered in blood. Although they didn't die, their ears were ringing, and they were in a sorry state. The demon wolf in this position took advantage of the situation and killed several people in an instant. Another loud explosion was heard. On the other side, another array was activated. Several people were trapped in the array and met with misfortune. "Block it! Don't let them rush over!" "Junior brother Yun. Senior brother, save me!" The scene was in chaos. The sudden eruption of the 2 explosion magical matrices caused everyone from the Holy Eve's spiritual land to tremble. Even though they already knew that they would have to pay a price for forcefully attacking, when the price was right before their eyes, it was still so difficult to accept. Sharp claws pierced through their chests and sharp teeth tore through their flesh. Screams were heard one after another. Fortunately, the Holy Eve's spiritual land maintained a defensive posture. Therefore, after a short period of panic, the 2 holes in the defensive line were quickly filled up by the nearby cultivators and stabilized. However, the dead cultivators couldn't be revived. Moreover, the explosion of the 2 explosion arrays had left a shadow in everyone's heart. Would the next array be on their side? What made them feel slightly relieved was that there were no more explosion arrays. Although Lu Yi had set up a large number of active arrays in the spiritual land, they were scattered everywhere. There weren't many arrays where the cultivators of the Holy Eve's spiritual land were. He didn't activate all of them at once. Instead, he left a few behind so that he could create a greater deterrent at the right time. Lu Yi, I'm going to kill you. Huo Liao Yuan roared as if he had gone mad. At the same time, Lu Yi felt the aura locked on him become stronger. Brother Xia, Huo Liao Yuan's condition isn't right, Tan Xing said softly to Xia Liang while blocking the monster wolves in front of him. After all, he was a Cloud River Realm 9th Order cultivator and the leader of this operation. He shouldn't be acting like this. He should have known that a strong attack would result in huge losses. Although the Holy Eve's spiritual land had suffered some losses, they weren't that big. Huo Liao Yuan's reaction was obviously a little exaggerated. I see. Xia Liang, on the other hand, replied incoherently, and a look of sudden realization appeared on his face. Tan Sheng, ? Xia Liang said in a deep voice, it seems that I have underestimated Huo Liao Yuan. This time, Lu Yi will definitely die. What a pity. He wasn't regretting Lu Ye's death, but that after Lu Yi died, he and Tan Xing would only get 20% of the bounty. After splitting it, each of them would get 10%. No wonder Huo Liao Yuan said that their help was just icing on the cake. If Huo Liao Yuan had such a thing, he and Tan Xing would really be just icing on the cake. He was willing to share 20% of the bounty not because of their help, but because he couldn't afford to offend the Wild Blade sect. Lu Ye's bounty couldn't be taken all by himself, so he used 20% to form a good relationship. In other words, Huo Liao Yuan felt a sense of crisis after he and Tan Xing were exposed. Or maybe it was because of Lu Ye's attack last night that he chose to attack the Holy Land today. Brother Xia, what are you talking about? Tan Xing was confused. How could Lu Yi be dead for sure? You'll know when you see. Xia Liang didn't explain too much because it wouldn't take long for everything to appear in front of them. It would be a waste of time to explain, but he didn't forget to remind Tan Xing, remember to escape in time. Tan Xing was even more confused, but he suppressed his doubts and silently made his move. The battle was still in full swing. Although the Holy Eve's spiritual land had lost more than 10 people due to the explosion of the 2 explosion arrays, the remaining cultivators still held the line and didn't let the wolves break through. Huo Liao Yuan's expression became more and more twisted with anger. Flames surged around his body, making him look like he was burning. Lu Yi suddenly had a feeling that something wasn't quite right. The aura that Huo Liao Yuan had locked onto him was too strong. At the beginning of the battle, this aura had locked onto him, but Lu Yi didn't care. Huo Liao Yuan had suffered a great loss at his hands, and so many cultivators had died. It was normal for him to keep an eye on him during the battle. After that, the aura kept increasing, and Lu Yi just thought it was caused by his anger. But now, how could the aura of a 9th Order Cloud River Realm cultivator be so strong? Lu Yi even had the feeling that he was being bound by an invisible force, and as time passed, that feeling became clearer and clearer. He raised his eyes and looked at Huo Liao Yuan, and saw him staring at him. Their eyes met, and Huo Liao Yuan was still shouting, Lu Yi, I'll kill you, as if he had gone crazy, but his eyes were clear. And from the beginning to the end, he was only shouting, and didn't take the initiative to attack. Shit! Lu Ye's heart thumped. He didn't know what Huo Liao Yuan was doing, but he was sure that he had fallen into some kind of trap. Huo Liao Yuan's continuous shouting suddenly stopped at this moment, and Lu Yi was shocked to find that he couldn't move. An invisible force was binding him, and he was firmly locked in place. Huo Liao Yuan smiled, as if his scheme had succeeded. He looked over calmly, Lu Yi, come and die. As soon as he finished speaking, an object slowly floated up from his hand, emitting a brilliant light. In an instant, everyone's attention was attracted to that object. It was a square object the size of a child's palm, and there was a big word engraved on the front, die. On the back, there was also a big word, fight. As soon as this object appeared, 2 rays of light shot out, one landing on Lu Yi and the other on Huo Liao Yuan, and like 2 ropes, they firmly bound the 2. Li Baxin, who was fighting on his sword, was shocked and exclaimed, "The death arena!" As soon as he said that, 100 flying swords flew into the air and attacked the palm-sized death arena. Feng Yuechan's expression also changed, and she moved to help. But whether it was Li Baxin's flying swords or Feng Yuechan's spells, they couldn't damage the death arena at all. Not to mention the death arena, even Lu Yi and Huoliao Yuan, who were trapped by the death arena, were unharmed. Chapter 607. Death Match Arena. Tan Sheng, who was defending against the demon wolves, exclaimed as he looked at the glowing object, "I see. No wonder Fire Prairie was behaving so strangely today. It turned out that they were going to use this object." Everything made sense now. It was the Holy Eve's spiritual land who had launched the attack, but they had been defending passively. Fire Prairie looked like he had lost his mind, but he was only shouting and did not do anything stupid. Everything was a facade to pave the way for this moment. Indeed. Xia Liang muttered softly. The truth was as he had guessed. Fire Prairie really did have a deathmatch arena. He was able to sense it because Fire Prairie was behaving strangely. Secondly, the aura he had locked onto Lu Yi was too abnormal. It was not Fire Prairie's aura, but the aura that extended from the deathmatch arena. That was why it exceeded Fire Prairie's limit. There were many unique treasures in the 9 regions. These unique treasures had all kinds of strange effects. The tracking disc that Tan Xing used to track Lu Ye's whereabouts was a unique treasure. The golden body token that Lu Yi used to save his life was also a unique treasure. The deathmatch arena was also a unique treasure. It only had one use, which was to lure the user who activated the deathmatch arena and the enemy who was targeted by the deathmatch arena into a deathmatch arena. In terms of value, this object could not be compared to the golden body token that Lu Yi used before. After all, it was a good item that could save one's life. The deathmatch arena was not used to save one's life, but to force the enemy to fight to the death. Therefore, it had a lot of limitations. It had to ensure that the enemy was weaker than the user. Furthermore, there was a prerequisite to using it. The aura extended from the deathmatch arena had to completely lock onto the enemy. In other words, Fire Prairie could not be too far away from Lu Yi. Furthermore, it needed some time to accumulate power. If Lu Yi exceeded a certain distance from Fire Prairie, the deathmatch arena would not be able to activate its effect. This was also the reason why Fire Prairie decided to launch the attack today. It was also the reason why he did not ask Xia Liang about the location of the Tianji pillar. It did not matter if there was a Tianji pillar or not. As long as he successfully activated the deathmatch arena, Lu Ye would definitely die. All of his previous actions had been a disguise, all in order to make Lu Yi lower his guard. But now, it seemed that his plan had been successful. Lu Yi hadn't realized the impending crisis until the very last moment. However, it was already too late. When the 2 beams of light from the deathmatch arena locked onto him and Huoliaoyuan, the power of this treasure was completely unleashed. Li Baxian's flying swords and Feng Yuechan's spells continued to bombard the deathmatch stage, but the small stage remained unmoved. Lu Ye's and Huoliaoyuan's figures, along with the small deathmatch arena, disappeared in a flash of light. "Junior brother!" Li Baxian cried out in alarm. He couldn't stop Lu Ye's fate at all. "Let's go!" Xia Liang bellowed and quickly retreated. Tan Sheng, who had been warned by him, followed closely behind. At the same time, all the cultivators of the Holy Eve's spiritual land were fighting and retreating in an orderly manner. Although Li Baxian and the other 2 were furious and chased after them with the wolf pack, the results were minimal. They could only watch as the cultivators of the Holy Eve's spiritual land retreated out of the range of the Forbidden Sky formation. Then, they all rose into the sky and ran away. The wolves chased them to the edge of the spiritual land, howling one after another, but no longer moved forward. They could still fight with the cultivators of the Holy Eve's spiritual land within the range of the space-restricting array, but once they left the range of the space-restricting array, they would become living targets. Although Li Baxian was angry and worried, he still had reason. He stopped chasing and immediately checked Lu Ye's battle imprint. In the current situation, Lu Yi and Huoliao Yuan had been drawn into the space created by the deathmatch arena. Even if he had 1,000 methods, he couldn't help. He could only determine whether Lu Yi was dead or alive through his battle imprint. "Senior brother." Feng Yuechan leaned over and called out softly, comforting him, "Senior brother is fine." "Senior brother, have you forgotten? In the hunting ground, junior brother Lu killed a 7th order when he was just a 3rd order. Now, he's already a 5th order." Although that battle wasn't a result of Lu Ye's efforts alone and the three of them had done their best, Li Baxian's eyes still shone with hope when he heard Feng Yuechan's words. He nodded repeatedly, "Yes, little junior brother is fine. As long as he can activate his final trump card." At this point, his face turned ugly again. He looked up at Feng Yuechan and his eyes lost focus. "Hupe is sleeping." Lu Ye's trump card needed to be paired with Hupe, but ever since Hupe had swallowed an overlord rank Yao core, it had been in a deep slumber and had yet to awaken. Not only was it in a deep slumber, even Yi had fallen into a deep slumber. In other words, the current Lu Yi had no external help at all. He was alone, facing an opponent whose cultivation was 4 minor realms higher than him. Li Baxian's figure became unstable and he couldn't help but stagger, his face suddenly turning pale. The space in the death arena was about 3,000 meters in length and width. The sky was empty and there were barriers all around. It wasn't that the space in the death arena was only so big, but that the size of the space in the death arena varied according to the cultivation of the user. Huoliao Yuan was a Cloud River Realm 9th Order cultivator, so when he used the death arena, the space was limited to this, but if a Spirit Sea Realm cultivator used the death arena, the space might cover a few dozen kilometers or more. When Lu Ye's figure suddenly appeared here, the invisible force binding him suddenly disappeared, allowing him to regain his freedom. He immediately observed his surroundings and saw Huoliao Yuan standing at the other end of the death arena. The surrounding environment felt familiar to him. He had been to this place before and more than once. During the Spirit Stream List battle, some of his opponents chose this kind of terrain. When others challenged him, he also chose this kind of terrain, but the range was smaller because it was more convenient for weapon cultivators to display their strength. So, was this place similar to the Spirit Stream List battle? It was just that Huoliao Yuan used a strange artifact to allow him to enter this place together. Pushing his spirit energy, Lu Yi tried to fly out without any hindrance, but he was blocked by the barriers around him. Furthermore, he could feel the sturdiness of the barriers and knew that he couldn't break them. Being trapped in such a small space with a Cloud River Realm 9th Order cultivator was an unprecedentedly bad situation. Although his strength had increased greatly compared to when he was in the hunting ground, he didn't think that he was a 9th Order cultivator's opponent. With the strength he could display now, he might be able to fight an 8th Order cultivator, but against a 9th Order cultivator, he would have to use his beast transformation secret technique. But Hupo was in a deep sleep, so he couldn't use his beast transformation secret technique. So, the only trump card he could use to deal with his enemy was the Fire Phoenix Spirit Rune. But this thing needed a certain amount of time to activate, and in this small space, his enemy wouldn't be stupid enough to let him slowly accumulate strength. Once he tried to activate the Fire Phoenix Spirit Rune, he would definitely be attacked like a storm. "Trouble. Don't waste your energy." Seeing that Lu Yi wanted to escape, Huoliao Yuan's voice rang out. "In the death arena, only one of us can survive. Only when one of us dies will the death arena be removed." Death arena? Lu Yi frowned slightly. He had never heard of such a thing. Although he was also a Cloud River Realm cultivator, and had even reached the 5th Order, his knowledge and experience were still too shallow compared to ordinary cultivators. It couldn't be helped. His cultivation time was too short. But based on his experience and Huoliao Yuan's previous actions, the so-called death arena should be a treasure with a special function. Who do you think will be the one who died? Huoliao Yuan crossed his hands behind his back and hovered more than 10 feet above the ground, looking down at Lu Yi coldly. Lu Yi glanced at him indifferently and rubbed the hilt of his mountain coiling saber with his thumb. Fortunately, the 9th Order cultivator who used the death arena against him was from the Sacred Flame sect. 99% of the Sacred Flame sect cultivators were fire attribute cultivators, and he was the least afraid of fire. If either Xiao Yang or Tan Xing used the death arena today, he would definitely die. But it was Hua Liao Yuan, so the situation was hopeless. Lu Yi! Hua Liao Yuan roared. Lu Ye's silence had undoubtedly angered him. He looked furious. You better accept your death obediently, or else I have ways to torture you. In the death arena, external forces couldn't interfere. His cultivation was higher than Lu Ye's by a full 4 minor realms, so he was confident in his victory. But even so, it couldn't erase the anger in his heart. On this trip, the Holy Eve spiritual land had suffered heavy losses. On the first day, more than 60 people had died, and today, nearly 20 people had died in the attack. Such losses could be said to be more than half of the people he had brought with him. He was even forced to use a precious treasure like the death arena. Even if he killed Lu Ye today, the sect would definitely hold him accountable. He only hoped that he could make up for his mistakes. Otherwise, his future would be ruined. He should be able to make up for his mistakes. After all, the bounty on Lu Ye's head was too huge. As long as he killed Lu Yi, not only would he not be punished, he would also be rewarded greatly. Which first-grade sect didn't want to kill Lu Yi? Lu Ye's response was an attack. His body rushed out like a vigorous cheetah, and with the support of wind travel, he left behind an afterimage as he quickly closed the distance between them. The first goal of a weapon cultivator against a magic cultivator was to close the distance and fight in close combat. Lu Yi was only a 5th-order cultivator, but Hua Liao Yuan was a 9th-order cultivator. As long as he got close to Lu Yi, it was hard to say who would die. After all, magic cultivators spent a lot of time studying magic arts, so their bodies were always weak. So, even if there was no harm in stalling for time, he took the initiative to attack. You're tuning in to the Han Li's Immortal Journey YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.